To Meera, Rajasthan seemed a bit like this.
When you buy a home, make sure it's always from the best builder. With 16 years of real estate expertise, over 100 superior projects, 17,000 happy customers, and 20 million square feet of living space. There's truly no better home than a Casa Grande home.
Hey! Hey, guys! Get the bags! Hurry up!
Come, please sit.
Come, have a seat.
To Arya, Rajasthan seemed a bit like this.
Wow, we'll all fit. All of us.
Festivals bring a lot of happiness and precious moments that make us smile.
Avail exciting offers on personal loans, car loans and gold loans with zero processing fee and low interest rate. Apply now on sbiyono.sbi or log on to bank.sbi and welcome happiness this festive season.
SBI, हर त्योहार शुभ शुरुआत.
To Huan, Rajasthan seemed something like this.
Guys, कल मेरी नई बाइक आ रही है.
Great. तब तो I will come with Rohan every day.
इंश्योरेंस है.
तुझे क्या लगता है? इंश्योरेंस, पीयूसी सब कुछ है.
I was talking about life insurance for Sia.
Jokes apart, guys, but आज मजा कल सजा नहीं होनी चाहिए.
Seriously, life insurance तो जरूरी है.
LIC का न्यू जीवन आनंद देता है डबल फायदा. मैच्योरिटी पे मिले फुल पेमेंट और लाइफ कवर चले जिंदगी भर.
ए हेलो, इंश्योरेंस है क्या?
Hindustan Institute of Technology and Science. Take your first step toward a future in excellence.
When you buy a home, make sure it's always from the best builder. With 16 years of real estate expertise, over 100 superior projects, 17,000 happy customers, and 20 million square feet of living space. There's truly no better home than a Casa Grande home.
हेलो अतुल.
हाय माँ, यहाँ रात हो रही है माँ.
सॉरी बेटा, बहुत याद आ रही थी. ओके, बाय 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 बाय.
माय पेरेंट्स. मेरे लिए ना कॉलेज चुना ना सब्जेक्ट्स, बट उनका प्लान था बहुत ही स्पेशल, जिससे बन गया मेरा फ्यूचर.
LIC का न्यू चिल्ड्रंस मनी बैक प्लान जो आपके बच्चों का फ्यूचर करे प्रोटेक्ट हर जरूरी मोड़ पर.
इट्स अ फ्यूचर बिल्डिंग प्लान.
Maya Angelou once said, "You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them. For 9 years now, the Hindu Lit for Life has continued to reflect in form, content and expression the spirit of the times and has stood tall and proud in celebrating the notion of free speech and expression. This year, this annual literary festival, the brainchild of Dr. Nirmala Lakshman, that began in 2010 as a one-day show and blossomed into a 3-day bonanza, turns 10. Milestones are special. They must be marked for the sake of memories. But we live in rather strange times. We are all, in a sense, still coming to terms with the pandemic and the havoc it has wreaked on life and humanity. But, as someone famous said, the very fact that we are alive together during the same moment is cause for celebration. We, at the Hindu Lit for Life, have believed in the strength, beauty and resilience of literature, and this year, as we mark a milestone, we raise a toast, yet again, to the power and the potential of words, of books and the world in which they emerge from and live in. Over the years, the festival has striven consistently from its place of birth, Chennai, to expand its reach, exploring fiction, non-fiction, politics, history, the arts, cinema, regional literature, in fact all genres that celebrate the idea of ideas. Over the course of its journey, the Hindu Lit for Life has enriched the literary space in Chennai, and by bringing to it powerful voices from across the world, it continues to hold monopoly in this space. In an ideal scenario, our 10th would have unfolded very differently. We had big plans, but the universe conspired differently. So here we are in a format that the world has rather very quickly adapted to, attempting to recognize 10 years of our journey through a 2-day festival that has, as always, even if we say so ourselves, been curated with thought and consciousness. The sessions this time are reflective of the context that we are in, and we hope that watching them will allow you the possibility of reflection and of healing. Thank you for being with us through our journey and for continuing to participate in it. We hope you will stay with us for the next 2 days. To deliver the inaugural address of the 10th edition of the Hindu Lit for Life, we welcome Mr. N. Ravi, Chairman of Kasturi and Sons Limited and publisher of the Hindu Group of Newspapers.
The Hindu has been engaging with books since its earliest days. Going through its archives, one finds an early review of a book on a child's history of India in 1889. Initially, the publication of books was treated mainly as news. Then reviews started appearing to inform readers about the content and the quality of books. In the third phase, reviews became more of a critical appraisal of books by academics and experts, and separate book review pages were published. Then followed the fourth phase of a separate literary supplement containing book reviews, essays on issues of literature, interviews with authors, extracts from books, and essays based on books. Through this period, books in Indian languages also continued to be reviewed. It was in 2010 that, at the initiative of Nirmala Lakshman, that the literary review came alive from out of the printed pages as a flesh and blood event. The Hindu Lit for Life was launched as an event featuring discussions with a wide range of authors, including academics, writers, poets, political figures, cinema artists, and designers. The initial response in Chennai was overwhelming as readers thronged to listen to and interact with in person with authors whom they had known only through their books. The fest was also taken to some other cities, including Delhi. This series had to be interrupted over the last 2 years because of the pandemic. Now a virtual Lit for Life is being launched with the support of authors, publishers and sponsors. While not ideal, we hope it will keep the viewers engaged with books and authors till such time as we are able to meet in person at the next Lit for Life.
Thank you, Mr. Ravi. Sometimes a walk down memory lane is a great way to appreciate where we are today. How far we have come, the roads that we have traveled, the people that we have met, the conversations we have had, the hits and the misses, the words and the stories. So here is a short presentation our team put together to celebrate the beauty of nostalgia. We look back at the memories we made and recall the 3 days in January where every year our city, Chennai, came alive with the buzz and the energy of literary thinkers, speakers, poets, performers, readers, in a way that for anyone who loved the world of books and all things that surround its fascinating world, the Hindu Lit for Life was literally the place to be.
And we are delighted that the festival has grown so exponentially over the last several years. And the measure of success is not just by the numbers that have been increasing steadily every year. Like we started off with maybe the odd 1,000 or 2,000, and over the last 3 years, it's been in attendance crossing 10,000 over the 3 days.
It's a wonderful way of celebrating achievements in the world of literature and devoted exclusively to literature and books.
They brought back that pride of a language.
You know, it's truly an honor and a privilege in a way to be at the Hindu Lit for Life festival. As a journalist, I've always had great admiration for the Hindu school of journalism.
I think this is one of the most significant literature festivals in this country.
I am the real messenger of God.
It's a great pleasure to be a part of the Hindu Lit Fest.
I also enjoy it all.
The north does not have the oceans.
Thank you all for being here. It so happened that at that stage I had been working for many years on environmental subjects.
I think it's a great pleasure and honor being on this platform with Mr. Ram and such a wonderful literary festival.
When my book came out and there was a lot of controversy and I was being attacked by many people, The Hindu was in fact the only newspaper or the first newspaper to editorially defend me. And I am much obliged to the Hindu editors and their editorial leadership for a very fine editorial they wrote in my defense and my right to write that book.
It's been a marvelous opportunity to come and visit the Lit for Life festival. I think it's a festival that's grown from strength to strength.
What I really like about the festival is that it's a literary festival. It's centered on books. People who come here to do sessions have books.
What did I like about it? I just found it very invigorating because I came in for some earlier sessions, and hearing other speakers talk, articulate, it excites the mind.
Be here. I've only been here for about an hour, but I'm really looking forward to my 2 panel events, and I've been watching some of the other panels via the live stream, which is a great addition, and I think they've all been fantastic, so I'm really happy to be here.
It's been a pleasure participating in the Hindu Lit for Life festival.
This is where I picked up language.
அது வந்திருந்த பார்வையாளர்கள் எல்லாமே என்னுடைய எழுத்துக்களை குறைஞ்சபட்சம் அதை பற்றி தெரிந்தவர்களாகவும் வாசித்தவர்களாகவும் இருந்தாங்க அப்படிங்கிறது எனக்கு உண்மையில ஒரு பெரிய உத்வேகத்தை கொடுத்ததாக இருந்தது.
It is special particularly to me because I have actually worked for the Hindu group, and I think that working as a journalist for Frontline was one of the best things that happened to me, both as a person, as a journalist and as a writer.
I think one of the wonderful things about being at a festival like this is the opportunity to meet other authors, many of whom are old friends, but also authors that I've only met through the pages of their books, and it's a wonderful opportunity to connect with them.
The Hindu Lit for Life
Literature Festival in South India.
I just love the audience.
And I've enjoyed the experience. It's organized so meticulously.
Every idea is born in someone's head. Every event in life needs an anchor, a force who keeps it all together and continues to imbue it with life and energy. In the context of the Hindu Lit for Life, that anchor is Dr. Nirmala Lakshman, Director of the Hindu Group and Director and Curator of the festival. Dr. Nirmala Lakshman, may I request you to kindly deliver the welcome address?
We are delighted to welcome everyone to the Hindu's first digital offering of Lit for Life. This is the sharpest literature festival in India, which has been bringing to you the most luminous minds of our times. Writers, thinkers, artists, scientists, historians, musicians, dancers, poets, theatre personalities, and many experts in various fields in a 3-day engagement in Chennai every year. In the wake of the global pandemic, which has caused so much tragedy and devastation across countries and communities, we have all had to hunker down and recalibrate much in our lives. People have lost loved ones, lost jobs, lost their moorings, and millions across the world have been forced into the depths of penury and deprivation by this virus. As the world moves towards healing and restoration, thanks to the enormous strides made with vaccinations and new treatments, it is with some caution that we are now moving forward to reclaim our dreams as well as our work and creativity. Over this evening and tomorrow, we bring you carefully curated sessions. These will embody this renewed spirit and bring you conversations and discussions that will energize you, deepen your insights about the challenges we face. We look at how to seek a new grounding and balance between our work life and our personal lives in this changed world. We explore the pandemic, look at the virus itself and its impact on our mental and physical health. We have sessions that will bring us new understanding of the urgent environmental challenges that we face. We have conversations on writing and on the magic of filmmaking. We have a presentation of art that is not only brilliant but very important. We have discussions on gender in the creative arena and very crucially how as human beings we can navigate the world around us with mindfulness and gratitude. This year, Lit for Life is being accessed by many thousands of subscribers who read The Hindu online as well as by our much loved, much missed festival audience who come to our on-ground festival year after year. I hope many of them will be tuning in from the comfort of their own surroundings. We are determined in the times ahead to get back to creating exciting literary events that will move forward to restoring what we had as a festival and indeed bring you more personal enjoyment and value. This digital version of the Hindu Lit for Life reflects that spirit of hope and faith in the resilience of the human spirit. We know that as people are straining to get back to a level of normalcy, qualified though it will be with the lingering presence of the virus, we need to pick up what we can of our lives, our livelihoods and our creative endeavors, and that is very important. We are privileged and proud to have renowned and indeed some of the best minds from India and abroad in every session in this digital program. I thank our distinguished speakers for accepting our invitation, for graciously submitting to this new digital format, and for readily agreeing to participate in this online event. My colleagues and I, The Hindu, are very grateful to all of them. I thank my colleagues who have worked very hard to make this happen, as this event could not have gone forward without their great efforts and support. So do join us in this digital version of the Hindu Lit for Life festival this evening and tomorrow in celebration of words, ideas and experiences. Indeed, we hope that this will be an event that while giving you much enjoyment and enrichment, will also herald a new tomorrow where we will collectively rise from the shock and desperation of the last 18 months and move towards brighter years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nirmala Lakshman, for your words and for all that you do for the festival. Ladies and gentlemen, and now we are ready to formally begin our sessions for the 10th edition of the Hindu Lit for Life. Our first session is My Life in Full, Work, Family and Our Future. Indira Nooyi in conversation with Vinay Kamath. This book, in which Nooyi also unravels with honesty the many challenges that came with managing her demanding job and a growing family, and what she learned along the way, is not a typical memoir. Aside from sharing the arc of her life and some key lessons that she learned from it, Nooyi makes a clear, actionable, urgent call for business and government to prioritize the care ecosystem, paid leave and work flexibility, and a convincing argument for how improving company and community support for young family builders will unleash the economy's full potential. Let me take a moment to introduce our speakers. Indira K. Nooyi served as CEO and Chairman of PepsiCo from 2006 to 2019. Her prescient strategic thinking, insight into consumer behavior, and wisdom on managing a vast global workforce make her one of the world's most sought-after advisors to entrepreneurs, executives, and governments. She is also revered as a role model for women and immigrants and celebrated for her empowering messages on inclusivity. Nooyi has been awarded the Padma Bhushan and the US State Department's Award for Outstanding American by Choice and has received 15 honorary degrees, including an honorary doctorate of Humane Letters from the Yale University in 2019. She is married to Raj Nooyi and has 2 daughters, Preeta and Tara. Vinay Kamath is Senior Associate Editor with the Hindu Business Line based in Chennai. Prior to joining Business Line in 1998, he did a short stint in television with TV18, where he was the Chief of News Bureau, Chennai. He has earlier worked with the Financial Express, Business World, the Times of India, and the Economic Times. A graduate in economics from the Vivekananda College, University of Madras, Kamath earned a diploma in journalism from the Times School of Journalism, New Delhi in 1986. He was also a member of the first batch of the Chevening Young Journalists program at the University of London in 1995. Ms. Nooyi and Mr. Kamath, over to you.
So welcome to the 10th edition of the Hindu Lit Fest, Ms. Indira Nooyi. Thank you for participating in the Hindu Lit Fest. I hope you have a sense of warmth and kinship talking to a journalist from Chennai, since this is the place you grew up in. So it's nice to have you on the show.
Well, I grew up with the Hindu. I grew up in Chennai, but I grew up with the Hindu. Hindu is a newspaper I read through my entire growing up, and it's my hometown newspaper. So it's wonderful to chat with you, Vinay.
Right. So your book is out at a time, when the Indian diaspora stock is on the ascendant, with the Biden administration, and there are a lot of Indians out there, and including the vice president is a lady of Indian origin. So the question to you would naturally lead to asking you, would the US administration be offering you a role to play? Would you accept if something is offered? Is anything on the anvil for you?
Yes. Let me, first of all, it's a privilege to be on the Hindu Lit Fest agenda. So thank you for having me. And, regarding your question, I am not a political person. I have no interest in getting into politics. I have no interest in serving any political administration because I'm a corporate executive and I just want to make change happen from the grassroots level. And that's it. I have no other ambitions.
So what motivated you to write this book at this stage? There have been dreams of press on you over the years of your time at PepsiCo. So why did you feel the need to write a book at this stage? Did you feel that you needed to say it all from your point of view?
Well, interestingly, this book never started out as a memoir. Telling the story is a very personal thing. And I really struggled with, do I even have to tell my story? What it really started off as was a book on how to enable women to rise to the top of companies, because there's still very few Fortune 500 companies who are CEOs, who are women. And so I thought perhaps I could write a book about what is it going to take to develop women to become, considered for CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. On the other hand, I was also seeing that during COVID, all of the essential workers like nurses and caregivers and frontline workers had no way to take care of their children or their aging parents because they had to go into a hospital or senior care center and stay there for 2 or 3 weeks for quarantine reasons. And when I looked at these dual issues, I realized that the common issue was women caregivers, parents, and then women as executives. And I decided to write a bunch of papers on caregiving in support of young family builders and women. And then people said to me, nobody's going to read a policy paper unless you inform it with the arc of your life. And so use the arc of your life to talk about how you handled care, how you managed all of these issues, and therefore what's the next step for society. And so if you recall, Vinay, and you've read the book is not a typical memoir in that it's not full of stories that are tell-all and, salacious stories. It's not about that. It's about the arc of a life, the lessons, and leading to, therefore, what do we need to do. It's a different sort of a book.
Yes, I did enjoy your book very much.
Thank you.
So that leads me to a question about the role of women in the workplace. You've written a lot about the role of women and work-balance life in your book. And do you see that organizations have stepped up over the years to help with more work-life balance? And do you see more women at the workplace from the time you worked in the early 90s?
I think if you look at women across the world, they are getting college degrees in larger numbers. They are getting the top grades in larger numbers. They are driven. They want to have economic freedom. They want to have, they want to have the power of the purse. They want to have their own income. They don't want to be dependent on other people. And to me, the most important thing is when we give birth to a girl child, we don't say we gave birth to an unpaid laborer for life. We say we gave birth to a girl child who can be whatever she wants to be. It's her choice. She wants to dream and be a, wonderful homekeeper, that's fine. If she wants to work, that's fine. If she wants to be a, community organizer, that's fine. We want everybody to have a choice to be whatever they want to be. And what we're talking about is how do we enable that to happen to everybody in the population? And now with women getting so many of the top grades and getting the college degrees, shouldn't the economy be providing a path for them to serve in the paid economy, because the country needs the best and the brightest to improve the country's GDP and to keep growing. Today, we're all in a war for talent. So I don't look at it as a woman or a man. I look at it as the best talent. And if you approach this problem as the best talent, I think you'll find a disproportionate amount of women coming into the workforce. And we also have to enable them to build families, because that's important for every country.
So, Ms. Nui, you spent 24 years in PepsiCo and 12 as CEO, and your book talks at length about that stint. So you had developed a credo of performance with purpose. So what would you say were your contributions at PepsiCo and that made it a different company when you left it as its chairman a few years ago?
PepsiCo was a high-performing company. I mean, it's a large company, growing, profitable, creating a lot of shareholder value. My goal was to take a great company and make it better. And the definition of making it better is, how do you create a company that's future-proofed? So as you see the future consumer trends, is the company reset or set to cater to the new consumer trends? Healthier products, a better environmental footprint, a better environment where people can bring their whole self to work. So I looked at the future trends that were going to impact companies like PepsiCo, and I worked to change the company to be successful in a world that demanded something different from companies. So all the investments we made to make the portfolio different, the investments we made to reduce water use, reduce our carbon footprint, reduce the amount of plastics that we put out into the landfills, more recycling. And what we did to have a more family-friendly environment in the company is really what differentiated my leadership in PepsiCo from the predecessors.
So what would you say were the decisions you made that influenced the course of PepsiCo the most? Whether it's selling the restaurant business or buying Quaker Oats and Tropicana, which changed the course of PepsiCo over the years?
I think that journey started in about 2000, or really 97 when we bought Tropicana, then we bought Quaker Oats. But it's not just that. We added a lot more as the times went on. And more importantly, we took the core products of Lay's and Ruffles and Pepsi, and we reduced the sugar and salt and fat even in those products. So this was a more profound transformation, because we were taking products that were great tasting, that had been around for years, and started to work on them to reduce what consumers started to say maybe we should consume less of. These were products made for a different time. We're making them more fit for the current times. And little by little, we're reducing the sugar and salt and fat. So it was a bold move, Vinay. I tell you something, sometimes it was a bit scary to do it, because you don't want to tinker with products that have done very well and taste great. So it was a bold move. There were times when, you went out and launched something with a butterfly in your stomach. But I think that leaders have to be courageous to make the right moves if the marketplace and the times so demanded. And so I had the backing of my board, and that's what we did.
So has PepsiCo veered from the path that you set it on, or has it taken it to a higher plane, especially in the values of nourish, replenish, and cherish that you've written about a lot in your book? So it's
interesting. They've taken it one step further. Now they're talking about winning with purpose. So I had performance with purpose. The new CEO is now saying winning with purpose. He has doubled down on committing to environmental initiatives. They're doing a lot on, things like SodaStream, beyond the bottle, so that we can reduce the plastic use. They're really pushing zero-calorie drinks and things like that. So, look, every CEO should come in and leave their mark on the company. You don't put a new CEO and say he's just continuing the past strategies. What I'm proud of what Ramon is doing is he's given the whole performance with purpose his own twist. and has doubled down and taken it in even more aggressive and interesting ways. And I'm seeing what they're doing at the Dubai Expo. It's wonderful. So I'm proud of my successor.
So just to switch tracks a bit, so your success in the US for the times you lived in America were quite remarkable. As you yourself have said in many interviews and in the book as well, you were an immigrant, you're a woman, a person of color, and then to rise to the heights of a quintessential iconic American company as PepsiCo. And you also mentioned that at that time, American boardrooms were entirely white and male dominated. And for a person of your origin to come and storm the higher echelons of PepsiCo. So what would you say, looking back, influenced the success of yours?
I'd say a combination of things. Clearly, people like me or anybody who's so different wants to take a seat there. You have to have the competence. You don't appear in these rooms just because you are who you are. You have to earn your place in those seats of power. But I think more importantly, I had mentors, incredible mentors, who stepped up and said, we see something in her, we want to mentor her, we want to pull her up. And they were my supporters, my promoters, and they were just unbelievable. They went out of their way to make sure I was successful. The third is, I will say this, Vinay, somebody like me, so different, coming and as an immigrant to the United States and being given a chance to lead an iconic American company, I think something like this happens only in America. So I'm very, very grateful and in awe of the environment that exists here that says, listen, let's not care about somebody's background or ethnicity or color. Let's think about who was the most competent person to lead the company at that time. And the fact that that happened, again, I look at the time when I was interviewing for a job in Pepsi, in Yale. Subsequently, it's always been about quality of the work as opposed to who you are and what you look like. And I think that's a valuable lesson for everybody, that that's how you should judge a person, not by their name or gender or ethnicity or color or whatever.
So was it in this context that you written in the book your encounter with the British Prime Minister? You don't mention the name, so I don't know who it is, but he asked you, how come you didn't immigrate to the UK 30 years ago? And you replied that I would not have been having lunch with you, Mr. Prime Minister. So was it in that context that...
For sure, Vinay, because I think the US had many more CEOs who were immigrants, people of color, and people who were rewarded for their merit. Things may be changing in the UK too now, but then I didn't see people like me there, okay? And so I was being honest and saying, I'm not sure I would be having lunch with you had I come here. And so, and he didn't disagree with me. He started to reflect. What I loved about this Prime Minister was that he began to reflect, saying, my God, that's a profound statement. How do we create an environment where we bring the best and brightest to the UK also? So this wasn't immediately telling me you're wrong or anything of that sort. He got very reflective. So I think everybody should reflect on, if talent is what differentiates companies, countries, entities, and if talent is what is the competitive advantage, how do we bring the best and brightest in to serve whatever entity we're looking at?
So you talk a lot about the role mentors have played in your career, and that's the kind of leitmotif that runs through your book. And you talk about how Norman Wade and S.L. Rao used to meet you in the queue for the visa outside the US consulate, and Wade's Mercedes would come up and stop beside you with coffee, and S.L. Rao would turn up early in the morning with breakfast. I mean, those were wonderful mentors to have. So how important is the role mentors played in somebody's career? And you yourself, I think, have mentored many at PepsiCo.
I think mentors themselves are important, but mentors have to be supporters and promoters. Don't just give advice, actively pull people up, push them. And that's what all my mentors did. They were mentors plus. But don't forget S.L. Rao. I mean, we forget the mention of S.L. Rao. He is as big a mentor to me as anybody else. And I still keep in touch with him. Remarkable man who was very vested in my career, was vested in my success. And long after I came to the US, he came and visited with me. We kept in touch. And recently I spoke to him again on the phone. It's amazing when mentors are secure about the people they're mentoring. They don't care if you are sent to jobs that are higher than what they got to, or if you even take their job. They are proud of you. And I talked to Surendra Rao even today. He is so proud of me. That to me is the mark of a great mentor. They are vested in their mentee's success. And that's what S.L. Rao did. That's what all the mentors I've had have done over the years.
Right. In fact, it's remarkable that you write in the book that you're standing in the queue outside the US consulate for your visa.
Yeah.
Wade's Mercedes would come and give you coffee, and S.L. Rao was coming at 4 a.m. to give you coffee as well.
Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that scene, standing outside on Cathedral Road in front of the embassy, and these people showing up, the only woman in the line, and these people show up and they're caring. How are you doing? Are you all right? Do you want to sit in the car for a few minutes before you go back and sit outside? I have never seen so much love and affection and care from people as I experienced in my life. Not just from Norman Wade and S.L. Rao, but all the people who mentored me gave me incredible amount of love and care and attention. And I gave them my undying loyalty.
So yes, it works both ways.
It was a two-way street, exactly right.
What role did Yale, you talked a lot about Yale in the book as well, what role did it play in your success in corporate America?
Great question. Now, many people have asked me, why did you repeat the equivalent of an MBA when you've already been to IIM Calcutta? I think I loved IIM Calcutta, don't get me wrong, fantastic education, awesome professors, the curriculum was way advanced. But let's not forget, I went to IIM Cal between 1976 to 78. All right, 74 to 76. I graduated from MCC in 74 to 76, 11th batch. 74 to 76, when I graduated, I'm 21 years old. 21 years old. And at 22 is when people graduated from college here. And then they work for 4 or 5 years before going to MBA school. So the average age of somebody going to MBA school in the US is somewhere between 26 and 27. Because they believe that before you come to do your MBA, you should graduate, mature, get some work experience so that your MBA program is more relevant to you. In India, we go straight from college into the MBA program. So when I went through the MBA program, I went through it as an academic, as a student, not as a business person with some experience. After working in Metro Beardsley and J&J, when I came to Yale, it did two things. It gave me a business degree with a twist, but to a more matured business person, that's me. And second, it gave me a gateway into the US business scene because Yale, the badge of Yale, meant a lot. Even though the Yale Business School was brand new, remember I was the third group to graduate from Yale, just the name Yale gave me incredible credibility and opened all kinds of doors. So I owe IIM Calcutta a debt of gratitude. I owe Yale a massive debt of gratitude. So I'm grateful to all the educational institutions that played a part in my life.
So I'm sure the fact that Yale had a Madras Connect also helped a great deal.
I'm not sure that mattered at all, but I was surprised at the Madras connection.
So again, picking out some passages from your book, you talk about how you went house hunting and there was, overt racial overtones. And so obviously you must have felt that in many times in your life in America. So did you feel that at the workplace and how did you deal with it?
Well, it happens everywhere. It's not just in America, it happens everywhere. The way I look at it is you can't define the 100% based on 5 or 10% of the people who behave badly. I tend to look at the 90 or 95 that were always supportive and welcoming. There's always going to be bad apples. And, you have a bad experience, you struggle with it, you grieve for it, but then you go on. And that's what I did, Vinay. I just looked through those bad experiences and said, got to get on with life. You cannot dwell on the few bad people who have a different perspective on immigrants or women or people of color. Don't care. And I think of all of the other people, welcoming, supportive, helpful, pushing you, promoting you. I look at that and I go, thank God I had all those people around me.
So no Indra Nooyi interview is complete without referring to your mother and the statement she made, which has become quite famous now. It's also referred to in your book as she telling you to leave your crown in the garage.
Let me give you a twist on the incident. Everybody knows about the crown in the garage story. But I think the bigger message from that is this lesson about power and humility. I think, my mother said it in Tamil in a very direct way to me, okay? But here's the point, Vinay. What she was really saying to me is, you can have all the power you want, but at home, you have to have humility. You can have all the power you want, but when you come home, people don't work for you. Don't treat them like you're the lord of something. You're not. You are the mother, as is your husband, the father. And I think now I would extend what she's saying to saying, both husband and wife, when they come home, should leave their crowns in the garage. You know what we do? When the husband comes home, we put a crown on his head. And when the woman comes in, we take away the crown. I don't care if the woman is working outside the home or not. When you're home, both have an equal role to bring up the family. The working husband, the working wife, or not the working wife, both have an equal role to bring up the family. Nobody should lord over the other when it comes to managing the family. Family is not female. Family is family. And that's the message she was giving us.
Yes, very powerful statement she made that time, I guess.
Yep. In retrospect, it's deeper than, how I reacted at that point.
Yeah, I know. You also mentioned that you reacted very angrily to that, but then later you
Yeah, I said, why can't you let me enjoy my success? But her point is, it's all fair, success, hold on to it. The house needs something, that's all I'm going to focus on.
So I think kind of reaching the end of our interview time, I'll just ask you this question. So what would you say, with the values and the learnings and the environment in the Madras that you grew up in the 1970s and the 60s, that helped you so much in your success in the US? I mean, there must have been some ingredients from Madras which took away to the US.
You know what's interesting, when people have read the book, even today, young people, they say nothing has changed in Madras. It's the same. We can relate to every one of these experiences. I think our Madras, except for changing its name to Chennai, has still remained very deeply rooted in culture, values, family, education, respect for each other. And I think that's what differentiates Madras from any other city in the world. Music, culture, you name it. It's interesting, when I come to Madras, I'm transported back in time. So yeah, sure, I can see some changes in the margin, but I think the core of Madras is still the core. And so let's not forget it.
And so there are obviously learnings from your college life here in Chennai and the way you grew up, which you carried forth to your life in the US.
Totally. I'm a product of my upbringing. I'm a product of the world's largest democracy. I am a product of the world's oldest democracy. So I'm a product of both the largest and the oldest democracy. But I am a product of the capitalistic system and democracy. And I'm proud of both.
Well, so thank you so much for sparing the time to do this conversation. Can I soon, so you can sign my copy of your book?
Of course, Vinay. And I look forward to seeing you. And thank you so much for the time you gave me today.
So thank you and bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for the deep and the fabulous insights, especially that wonderful story with Nooyi's mother that we have heard ever so often. Also, thank you, Miss Nooyi, for raising a beautiful toast to Madras, a city that has managed to retain its core in a rapidly changing world. next session is Shashi and Sashi. Shashi Tharoor in conversation with Sashi Kumar on life, literature and politics. As a freewheeling conversation between these two brilliant minds and fine speakers, we thought that this session would be ideal to celebrate the innate spirit of the festival, which has really been as much about books as about the environment that influences it and the people who inhabit it. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce the speakers. Dr. Shashi Tharoor, a third-term Member of Parliament for Thiruvananthapuram, is the best-selling author of 22 books, both fiction and non-fiction, besides being a former Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and a former Minister of State for Human Resource Development and for External Affairs in the Government of India. He has won numerous awards, including the Pravasi Bharatiya Samman, a Commonwealth Writers' Prize, and the Crossword Lifetime Achievement Award. In 2019, Dr. Tharoor was also awarded the Sahitya Akademi Award in the category of English non-fiction for his book An Era of Darkness. He chairs the Parliament's Standing Committee on Information Technology. Sashi Kumar is a print and broadcast journalist, filmmaker and media entrepreneur. He founded and chairs the Media Development Foundation, which administers the Asian College of Journalism. He was among the earliest newscasters in English on national television, Doordarshan, the West Asia correspondent of The Hindu, and news anchor on Radio Bahrain in the mid-80s. In 1992, he founded and launched AsiaNet, India's first satellite TV channel in a regional language, Malayalam, and the country's first statewide cable TV network in Kerala. His latest media venture, Asiaville Interactive, was launched at the end of January 2019. He has received many awards for his work in journalism and films. Welcome, Mr. Shashi Tharoor and Mr. Sashi Kumar. Over to you.
Hi, Sashi. It's wonderful to be with you this evening.
Wonderful to be with you, Shashi. Long time.
In fact, yes, a very long time. And we haven't met as often as we should, but this is a good occasion.
It is indeed. Thank you for doing it.
When Nirmala Lakshman called me and told me or asked me whether I'd be in conversation with Sashi Tharoor, the Hindu Lit Fest, I said nothing would please me more than that. And so I'm very happy. And then I wrote to you and suggested that we should probably have a freewheeling discussion on what was on the top of my mind, life, literature, language, and politics, all of which you're involved with. And you said that's a good idea. So that's what we are going to do. In between that, I must admit that I had overlooked a PDF copy of his latest book, which is the context of this discussion in the Hindu Lit Fest, Pride, Prejudice, and Panditry. But
this is actually the first event, Shashi, on this book.
First book, yes, first event. But I did catch up with it, and so I spent all of yesterday and a bit of the day before racing through the book. In any case, it's a 500 plus 525 page plus volume, and I couldn't have done a close study of it even within a week or two. But I must say, it was wonderful reading it, and Sashi is at his best there, of course, as a raconteur. He introspects, he reflects on issues. There is his passion for language. There is his acerbic wit, all of that shining through. And it's, I think, first of all, from Aleph, this book, Pride, Prejudice, and Panditry, even if it's a plug on my behalf for my namesake, I think all of you should read it. It's well worth the time you spend with it. So, Sashi, let's start in the sequence that I thought we'd speak about, life. Now, when I read this book, it's an eclectic collection of sorts. What struck me is, when you look at your oeuvre, I mean, you're no longer, I mean, you're not by any stretch of imagination at a position where you need to look back on life. You're in the thick of it and there's a long way to go. But nevertheless, you have a substantial body of work, and one could speak in terms of the Tharoor oeuvre, if you like. How would you characterize it? Would it be, as Isaiah Berlin calls it, the fox approach or the hedgehog approach?
The fox knows a little bit about lots of things, and the hedgehog knows lots about one thing.
Yes.
No, I would say I'm probably a fox in that regard. When you mention this business about looking back on my life and career, the truth is that I already had a bit of a shock a couple of years ago when the crossword people gave me a Lifetime Achievement Award. And I thought, my gosh, that's the kind of thing you give people in their absolute dotage, when you're no longer expecting anything more particularly interesting or original from them. And suddenly there I was with a Lifetime Achievement Award. I mean, it was an opportunity to accept that I have inflicted enough on the reading public that I can look at a lifetime of work. And when David Davidar wanted to do this for Aleph, it was a couple of things in mind. It was the 10th anniversary of his publishing house, even though I've known him as a publisher for over 30 years, but in the new house, it's 10. And secondly, because, of course, it marks 40 years of published books. My first book came out in 1981, Reasons of State. And it also is, in many ways, a half a century of writing in print, more than half a century, really, if you go back to my earlier scribbles in the Junior Statesman and so on. And that means that in some ways, it is fitting to have a volume that will expose a new readership to some of the variety of thoughts and concerns I've had. And I welcomed it for that reason. I have, as you know, I have an interest in history, but very much an amateur interest. I did an honors degree in history and really never studied history again. So I would never dare or presume to call myself a historian. But I have an amateur's interest in history, and I've written about particularly the history of modern India with a lot of passion, and I dare say some knowledge. As a politician, as well as in my pre-political life, I've written about politics. And there are some differences really between my insights from the outside, when I could see the wood and not the trees, and my perception from the inside, where perhaps I'm overwhelmed sometimes by the trees. And you can see a taste of both in the Indian politics section of this book, because, for example, the macro view with my arguing a case for a presidential system, I first did that a dozen years before I even came into politics. But an essay like The Life of an MP is about my actual daily experience as an MP, with what people, my constituents, come and ask me. So you've got all of that.
Right.
Then there's a bit of world affairs, my memories of Kofi Annan and some of my global thoughts. Hinduism, I thought, was a worthy inclusion, even though really it only features in two of my books, which are strongly overlapping books, because the fact is that today there is an understanding of Hinduism that is not mine, and I felt it necessary to lay out my markers there. And I thought it was worth offering some excerpts from that writing in order to share with readers my perspective. Aleph also went in for my passion, which is cricket, and that's something which I've been watching Test cricket since I was 7 years old, and I've written about it, not very much of late, but occasional pieces which are also in this collection. Then some slightly whimsical, light-hearted pieces from some of my magazine columns, some writing about writing. And then, of course, there is fiction. And the fiction is something which every time I publish a book, without fail, some fans will write saying, why have you not published a novel again? And it's now been 20 years. So I owe them an answer. And I think in some ways, publishing this selection of excerpts from my fictional work is as much a reminder to me that I began life as a fiction writer and need to find again my vocation in that area, rather than become the political polemicist that in some people's minds I've been reduced to. And then finally, they've tossed in some speeches as well, which obviously are not as polished as the written pieces, because they're not meant to be. I mean, they were actually transcriptions of what I spoke.
The spoken word, as you call it.
That's right. So that's the whole thing, Shashi. And as far as looking back on this book is concerned, I'm happy to have it, particularly for those who are interested in all my work but will never read 22 books. Here they get a flavor
Yes,
of
they
pretty
do.
much most of the
Yeah.
22 and the concerns in that 22,
Right.
which, as you asked, are the concerns of a fox.
Right. That's wonderful. I found, there was the personal Tharoor emerging from this, which is very valuable. We get to know a lot more about you from your college days, about your parents. There's also, of course, you don't touch anywhere too much about the loss that you've had about your wife. Of course, you are, I think, legitimately upset about the way you've been, it's been bandied about, particularly in the media and in public, and the short shrift that you got at the hands of, even a bulk of the media, shall we say. But looking at it as a Stephanian, for instance, one of the things that struck me is, you have this anecdote about Natwar Singh, who speaks to all of you in college and warns not to join the civil service because you then have to take be the behest of some politician. And you, I think, say that that's probably why you steered clear of getting into the civil services, but went on to the UN. And then you had a good shot at becoming Secretary General, which you lost for being your own man, as it were. They wanted someone, that's the implication I get, who is not independent-minded. Now that you're in politics, do you think being independent-minded is a liability? And in the party that you're in, at the stage that you're in, where you're identified with the G23, whatever that means, what is the lesson that you've learned? Or will you continue to be your own, spokesperson? Will you continue to be what you want to do?
Shashi, the truth is that, first of all, on the G23, there really is no such animal. A group of senior colleagues wrote a letter, invited some of us who were able to be in Delhi during the COVID pandemic to come in and sign it. There were some colleagues who were able to travel from other places. There were some colleagues who were already living in Delhi and who were able to sign it. And that was as simple as that. There was no formal organization. I dare say there are many who share the sentiments expressed in the letter who couldn't come and sign it. And there are some who've signed the letter who moved away from its content since then. So there is no formal G23. I should make that very clear. But having said that, as you probably noticed over the years, I have never ceased to be my own man. I have my own mind. I believe it is my duty to express my thoughts. I said very clearly to people from the start that I didn't acquire my political convictions through being in politics. I had my convictions, my values, my principles, and I expressed them in my writing for almost 2 decades before I actually came into politics. What am I saying? But for a quarter of a century, I expressed them from my first book in 81 to my entry in politics in 2008, which was 27 years. And therefore, I already had a fully formed political philosophy, which in the first dozen years or so of my writing actually was not congruent with the Congress parties. And I was a critic of the Congress party, a fact of which many people reminded the Congress president at the time, Mrs. Gandhi, when she was considering my nomination to a seat in parliament. But anyway, when I came into the party, my principal opponents in Thiruvananthapuram were at that point were the left. Now they're the BJP. But the left would park a lawyer fellow in the audience at each of my public gatherings to get up and read aloud excerpts from my earlier writings that were critical of the Congress party. And challenged me to disown them. And I said, I don't disown them. But don't forget, I'm not fighting the elections of 1977. I'm fighting the elections of 2009. And that usually was enough for the audience to accept my bona fides as a former critic, now turned supporter in the current climate of the Congress party. And yes, I have sometimes rightly and justifiably been accused of having spoken out of turn. The party felt impelled to withdraw my official status as spokesman because I said things that were not the party line. And every once in a while, I continue to say things which the party finds convenient to disavow. Most recently was before the 2019 elections, when I said if the BJP is re-elected, the country could become a Hindu Pakistan, and the Congress party official spokesman denounced the expression, having unfortunately overlooked the fact that the phrase comes from Jawaharlal Nehru and not from me. but I was using it, and therefore I was promptly disowned. So I've understood that my idiosyncratic willingness to speak my mind is not always the most welcome thing in politics. And I've realized that there may be a price to be paid for being my own man. But I have always felt that if I'm not my own man, then I'm not bringing anything useful to politics. If I'm just a cookie cutter politician, as the Americans would say, somebody who blindly parrots whatever the party wants him to parrot and does what the party wants him to do, the party could get 100 other people to do that for them. Whereas if they want me, then they get me with my idiosyncrasies and all. And so far, anyway, they have been willing to renominate me for the ticket from Thiruvananthapuram, even though they know that I've not always fallen in line with them. And I take it in that spirit, Shashi. I will be myself. I'm loyal. Sometimes when I disagree with the party, I do consider it wiser just to be silent on some issues.
Sure.
But there are occasions when I'm obliged to disagree with the party, and I do so. And I think so far, at least some elements in the party have always accepted that there was a principled, logical reason why I took the stand I did.
One of the things that comes across very strongly is your hatred for those who switch sides politically. I think you're quite strong about that. You say, in fact, you use a term which is about striptease. I forget the term that you use, the word, that you can't be shedding your party like you shed clothes, in a striptease or something like that. And this is interesting because paradoxically, partly a media creation or largely a media creation, no doubt, you were also seen as a soft, shall we say, subject when it comes to someone being poached by the BJP or someone who could be a candidate for the BJP. You've actually gone to great extent to explicitly deny that and say that, how this is, there's nothing, you've never even thought of this, that's not even occurred to you. But why does this happen? Is it because you're ambivalent about things? Is it because you're equivocal? For example, your approach to Modi in the book, there are sections where you seem to be in awe of the man, where you seem to admire some of his qualities. And there are sections where you're very acerbic, you're very critical. His foreign Johns, that his foreign policy is a total disaster, his Hindutva, and all of that, and that he's destroyed the secular foundations of India. So is this a problem that you're being a writer and you see both sides of an issue? Is that necessarily a virtue in politics or a liability?
No, I'm prepared to accept that many would see it as a liability, Shashi. I just feel an obligation to be myself. And the myself that I am will sometimes indeed see merit in what my opponents and critics say. I've been that way all my life. I've never been dogmatic, even as a UN official. I have a point of view. If somebody is able to convince me that their point of view is equally valid or even wiser, I'm prepared to change my mind. And that's something that is not respected in politics, where you have to stick rigidly to a party line, whether you agree it or not. But I do want to say those who thought I would switch to the BJP simply haven't read me. They are not literate people, because nobody who has read me would believe that I would switch there. I have said that people have every right. See, a political party is two things. It is a vehicle for ideas, and it is an organization that constitutes that vehicle.
Yes.
So the ideas, values, and principles I have are in the Congress party today, and to simply not fit into the BJP. The Congress party as an organizational vehicle is a different matter. If people like Jyotiraditya Scindia or Jitin Prasad felt that the organization of the Congress party was not satisfying their political aspirations, and they had either left to start their own party or joined a like-minded party, another one with the same sets of principles and values, I don't think that I would have the right to be critical, because each individual has to judge at what point the vehicle is going in the destination that he agrees we need to go. But if you leave the vehicle altogether and go into a vehicle that is going in the opposite direction, then what are your principles worth? So the article, the essay in the book, which on that particular subject, Shashi, is not a criticism of abandoning parties, because you rightly implied through your own question that I'm not a rigid party man. I have my own convictions. But what it is a criticism of the abandonment of principle. A politics without principle, to me, is not politics at all. So I feel that my convictions are not for sale. And I would have hoped that someone like these two individuals are both friends of mine. And I would say Scindia was one of the best and most articulate voices of the Congress in both English and Hindi against the BJP. And to see him seemingly expressing with the same sincerity, earnestness, and enthusiasm the opposite point of view on BJP policies versus Congress, to me, is just incomprehensible. It's not a question of, as you say, being acerbic or hostile about it makes me question whether anything he said in his previous avatar was real. Imagine if, like his father, he had got angry with the Congress organization and set up, let's say, a Madhya Pradesh regional party or even a Gwalior regional party, whatever, with the same political principles that he has defended, but with a different organizational vehicle which will serve his political ambitions better. I don't think that you and I can sit here in judgment on him because he has remained true to his principles, but he has pursued his ambitions. But when you pursue your ambitions at the cost of your principles, then you raise fundamental questions about whether you have any principles and what those principles are worth. And this is my problem. I mean, in the sense that I will occasionally go out of line as far as the Congress party is concerned, but never have I betrayed the values and principles that I've stood by for as long as I've been in public life, and arguably since well before I was in public life and was writing books and articles in the media.
In fact, you take that nuanced position and you're proud of the Congress in Kerala, for instance, when you say that Karunakaran or PC Chacko, they might have set up their own faction in the party, or PC Chacko went to the NCP, which is an extension, in your view, of the Congress values. But subsequently, what's happening now must be very embarrassing for you, where many of your leaders in the Kerala Congress have crossed over to the CPM, which by your definition must be exactly the opposite of what they stood for.
No, in fact, it makes me utterly cynical about the CPM as well, that a party supposedly built on a very rigid ideological apparatus with literally a century and a half of literature, writings, exegeses, and theories, with a Politburo and usually a member for ideology of the Politburo sitting there, that such a party could accept these congressmen suggests to me that even the CPM should really rename itself Kerala Desam or something like Telugu Desam, because that's all they are. They are a regional party with ambitions in one state and absolutely no political ideology worth the name.
Right. But is there a Congress in Kerala at all now, as we speak?
No, there is certainly. I've just come from a number of Congress party functions, which I have tweeted about, so I'm not revealing any secrets. One was a meeting of our representatives at the Panchayat level in my parliamentary constituency, talking to them about how to reach out to the grassroots of people in order to try and help them, be of benefit to them. And the other function was in one ward of the 100 wards in my constituency, in my city, where that ward committee held a ceremony to give awards to all the student high achievers when the recent examination results came out in Kerala. And I was the one asked to inaugurate that function, give away the awards. And this sort of thing shows me political parties at their best. I'm not a great fan of demonstration politics and dharnas and strikes. And too many people in the media seem to judge the effectiveness of a party only by how many times it's in the streets courting arrest. I know that has to be done once in a while to show the passion with which you believe something. But a lot of the daily life of politicians and political parties ought to be in connection with society, the society in which they live and work. I feel satisfied when a Congress party worker comes to me with a little old lady who's entitled to a BPL, below the poverty line card, has not been denied it because she's not a communist voter. That happens all the time in Kerala. The communists claim to stand for the proletariat, but they will stiff the proletariat if the proletariat is not inclined to vote for them. And when people come to me with people like this, I'm happy to help. Or when a student suddenly loses a parent and is not able to pay her final year fees and so on, I try and help them out of my own pocket, because to my mind, these are the kinds of things that actually translate into politics as social service, which to my mind is what politics really ought to be about. If you have larger political aspirations and policy interests, as I do, you can pursue them at the national level. But if you want the electoral legitimacy to be able to debate laws and make policies, then you have to be relevant to ordinary people in the society or the subsection of society that you represent. And there, I think the Congress still hasn't lost the plot. They're still there and they're doing that kind of thing. And that's what I believe needs to be done.
Another aspect of your thinking, which emerges from your writings, is that while you're all praised for Pandit Nehru, the first decades of independence, you don't seem to be in full concurrence on the idea of socialist economics or idea of subsidies. You seem to be viscerally against these ideas. You, for instance, praise Nehru as a Democrat, as a very tolerant person, as someone who sees the oppositional point of view. No mention about the fact, coming from Kerala as you are, that he dismissed the EMS government in 1959, which could hardly be called a democratic act. So do you, you're blindsided on some of these aspects of the Congress, and I think from what you just said as well, there's hardly any mention about the communists or the left in your book, except of course to bash them as you've just done. Is that a fair thing to do? Because after all, the left comes to power in Kerala alternately, and this time, consecutively, they must be doing something right?
Sure. So Shashi, let me answer. You raised several points on socialism. Indian socialism sadly degenerated very quickly into bureaucratic capitalism. That is, that you had bureaucrats instead of businessmen on the commanding heights of the economy, making decisions they were not either trained or qualified to make and had no incentive to succeed in making. And so this condemning the nation to large numbers of loss-making public sector enterprises, draining the taxpayers' money, was to me just bad economics and common sense. I'm not an economic ideologue, but I think I do have enough common sense. I'm somebody who manages his own budget with some principles of respect for avoiding unnecessary debt and so on, and trying to do things sensibly and fairly frugally. And I respect that, but I don't respect the kind of profligacy that came on the backs of bad economics. And I would say that by the late 1980s, if not earlier, it was crystal clear that our economic policies had created a massive, inefficient, bureaucratized state apparatus without any corresponding benefits for the Indian people. And that one of the best things the Congress Party ever did, in my view, was 1991, the liberalization, which made possible channels such as the one you started. It wouldn't have been possible in the previous era. There was an opening up of economic space as well as related activities in the fields of information, media, education, health, and so on, which have been transformative in India. I mean, I don't think that reducing liberalization to the sudden availability of foreign brand names in India, which is what everyone does, is fair, because that's only one part of it, and I would say the more superficial part of it. So as an NRI, I had to notice it, because till then, every time I came, I had to bring rather ordinary items of daily consumption from the West, which were not available in India. And suddenly that became no longer necessary because everything was available in India. So as an NRI of the day, I saw that made a difference to people's daily lives. But the much larger issue was the opening up of horizons, the opening up of possibilities. And those actually made a lot of our economic growth and prosperity possible.
Having said that,
communists, just to finish on the second part of your question. The communists, I agree with them on two principles solidly. One is secularism, or the importance of upholding a bigotry-free society. We tend to have similar instincts on social issues. I believe, and I believe at least India's communists believe, it wasn't true of other communist parties necessarily, that the government has no place in the kitchen, no place at the dining table, no place in the bedroom, and the communists tend to have the same approach, and that's very good. Similarly, I share the faith in the promotion of equality and social justice that the communists claim to be about. What troubles me about the communists is their hopeless ideology, and even worse, their interpretation of the ideology, which led them, for example, to oppose the introduction of computers into India, and the CPM sent gundas to the offices that first introduced computers, LIC offices and so on, to smash them and break them. That kind of troglodyte mentality was a confirmation of the fact that this is a party that is unable to deal with modernity. Similarly, they oppose mobile phones. The communist leaders saying that mobile phones are going to be a plaything for the idle rich and that India doesn't want them, they should be banned, etc. And now, communist mobile phones are chirping away in the phone of every communist leader, in the pocket of every communist leader. And so they should, because nothing has empowered the common man of India, including the unlettered working class individual, as much as the mobile phone has. So the communists have been consistently wrong on most of the things that have mattered in the last 20, 25 years of India's economic progress. And they've always learned their mistakes about 15 years too late. So, it takes 15 years of wrong decisions for a Buddhadev Bhattacharya to come along and actually have a progressive economic policy. But then, of course, he's resisted within his own party and eventually loses the election and he's out. Now, what are they doing right? It seems that what they're doing right, frankly, is spending taxpayers' money in buying voters' loyalties. And I'm afraid everyone can do that. They happen to be in power and they use that power well to distribute free kits to food kits, grain and rice and oil and spices and other essentials to people throughout the state. People in Kerala in particular, but everywhere in the world, I'm sure, are happy to get things free. And if that's all it takes, they'll do it. Similarly, payment of pensions. The government was right to ensure that payments of pensions would be made on time and in full. Whereas previous governments, including previous communist governments, had been less than consistent about that, largely because Kerala has an extremely overfunded, overstretched budget and is unable to often meet its obligations and payments and even salaries. And therefore, when the communists did this for the first time, people said, we're getting our pension, let's vote for them. Yesterday, I was being told in Thiruvananthapuram about a BJP worker who was canvassing for the BJP and privately saying that he was going to vote for the communists because he's got his pension every month this year. So that sort of thing has nothing to do with ideology as much as sensible, efficient targeting of government subsidies. And that they do well. And I'm not saying that's bad. I think if the Congress came to power and ran those things efficiently, the Congress would also get re-elected.
All right, just a couple of quick questions on the political scene, and then we'll shift to literature and language.
Okay.
Arguably, the UPA won worked the way it did, precisely because of the moral pressure that the left provided. And UPA 2 derailed the way it did because that pressure was removed, because they fell out on the nuclear deal, as you know. And this is a fairly accepted, I think, perception, fairly accepted, this is what really happened. So obviously the left may not come to power on its own, but it had the kind of influence on the Manmohan Singh government in the first, UPA 1 phase, which you saw the results when it wasn't there in the UPA 2. So I don't know whether the problem with the Congress really is that it has become proto-BJP in some sense, although it says it is against saffranism. Who opened the locks in Ayodhya? Who started this whole cultivating the soft saffron Hindutva vote? Who unleashed a Ramayana on media, which I know, on television, and desecularized the media, which was until then strongly secular? It was a progressive, young, modern Prime Minister, Rajiv Gandhi, not even one of the old Congress, leaders. So Congress, I think, has a kind of, it's a Janus-faced organization. It says something, it does something else. It has these regional satraps. It has a high command culture which is why you have this G23 and so on happening. It has feudalism of the worst order operating in its fold, which you're unable to, to get away with or to get out of. And the left, by comparison, is a progressive, is a modern, is a secular, some of the things you yourself enumerated, party. And the Congress, perhaps now, I'm putting it to you that now, when Rahul and Priyanka are doing what they are doing, and there is talk in some circles in the media that they are being more left, is that probably what is upsetting the diehard congressmen, those who have vested interests, and you're probably an exception in the G23, because I think 90% of them couldn't win an election if they stood for one. So what is this all about? It is an external pressure by Congress preventing the Congress. There's no fighting chance that Rahul Gandhi can bring about a change there, or Sonia or Priyanka. Unfortunately, it's a dynastic party. It is a high command driven party. Everyone says without them, you can't run the party. And everyone says without the Congress, you can't have an opposition. It's a kind of vicious circle.
All of that is true. I'm not sure where to begin to comment, and I think we should move on to literature.
All right.
but let me say, in all fairness, that as far as the some of the things you said, I mean, yes, the communists were a very constructive force in UPA 1. They supported the Right to Information Act. They supported the Right to Education Act. They supported the efforts made to introduce NREGA. And all of these things, even if there's any quarrel about the origins or who takes the intellectual ownership of it, certainly it could not have been done without the support of the left. And I grant you that these were all very, very good and useful innovations. Some would say that they came from the National Advisory Council Sonia Gandhi had created of independent-minded experts, some of whom may have been left-inclined. But others would say it came because the CPM was in the de facto in the ruling coalition, was pushing for them. Be that as it may, all those were good things. And as you said, they very foolishly and unwisely broke with the UPA on the nuclear deal, having completely failed. Again, this is the kind of ideological blinkers these people wear. Having completely failed to understand how important that was to us, we had to break out of the isolation that we had been condemned to because of Pokhran, where our scientists couldn't get visas for scientific conferences in the Western world. That's how bad things were. And we were in a situation where the Chinese and the Russians and so on are merrily doing what they want as communist countries in cooperation with the West as it suited them and taking advantage of all that, whereas we were ostracized. And I think the left should really have had the brains to realize that this was a policy in the national interest about breaking out of India's isolation and did not sell any of India's interests to the Americans. In fact, to this day, there has been really nothing after the nuclear deal that the communists can point to saying this is why we oppose the deal. It was simply ideology, and that's one of the things that I find totally worth jettisoning about the left in India. Now, on the question of continuing deficiencies in the Congress party, as a Congress MP, I will simply say that these are perceptions that we know you hold, that many others have widely shared. We've had debates about this back and forth over the years, and I would rather put that subject aside for later simply because we're here to talk about a book. But that nonetheless, I do believe that what matters in politics are the ideas and values that a party stands for. And if you have to choose between the ideas and values that the Congress embodies and what the BJP is trying to do to this country as a votary of a particularly pernicious dogma, called not just Hindutva, I would argue it is more than Hindutva, it is Moditva. It is Hindutva plus an alarming personality cult, far worse than anything any high command in the Congress could ever have constituted. So I would say that for all of these reasons, we are facing a significant challenge, which I think obliges us to find the best vehicle, the best, shall we say, instruments to take on this challenge of the BJP.
Finally, on the political front, and this comes from the book, vis-a-vis fascism, the F word, as you call it, one of your chapters is called the F word. It's about fascism. And you're very wary there. You play a neat trick there, I think, where you cite Ashish Nandi, you cite Umberto Eco's 14 principles of what qualifies as fascism or what characterizes fascism, O'Toole on how a minority government can become fascist. And then, but you're not saying whether it's fascist or fascistic. You refuse to be characterizing it. You're just citing all of it, and the QED should say it's fascism, but you don't say that.
I want the readership to draw its own conclusions. But I will say, Shashi, in all fairness, that the word fascist has become just a routine term of abuse for so many in our political space.
True.
That it's become what the West calls a weasel word. There is a word from which all the meaning has been sucked out. So I thought, let me focus on the meaning rather than the word, because then the word becomes a red rag and people no longer think about the meaning. So what concerns me is that as far as we in India are concerned, these individual elements that constitute the problem with this kind of government, these need to be confronted, addressed, and overcome, whether or not you apply the label, that begins with the letter F. That's the thrust of what I'm saying. And, honestly, I think genuinely that it doesn't matter very much what adjective we use. What we should worry about is deinstitutionalization, about the personality cult, about the intimidation of the media. I mean, all the 14 points of Eco that find their counterpart in India. He talks about racism or anti-Semitism. We can talk about Islamophobia. But we have equivalents for all of these elements that the world has been warning about since the 1930s. And I think, therefore, for us not to be aware of the dangerous direction in which some of our government's policies are going to be foolish. Having said that, we are still a democracy, whereas all these institutions are beleaguered, we are still able to have free and fair and honest elections. Undoubtedly with an election commission whose conduct has not been exemplary in the last couple of years, but nonetheless, with a system where I don't think most of us actually believe that our votes are not counted accurately. I mean, I certainly can tell you that I was given all sorts of warnings as late as 2 days before the voting in my constituency that the machines had been rigged against me. And I won by almost a lakh of votes. So I'm assuming that even though I am a rather prominent critic, that the government is prepared to beat me fair and square, but also to lose to me fair and square, which they did.
Right. Now to come to language, for some reason in the social media, there's this caricature about you, about the words that you use, the big words, and the phobia. It's an unpronounceable name. You probably you'll be better at. It's called hippopotomonstrosequinellophobia or some such thing.
Sesquipedalophobia.
Yeah. It's but to be. I mean, when one reads you. I mean, I raced through these essays, these 500 odd pages, and I probably tripped a couple of times on defenestration, which keeps coming off and on. And I think you like that word. You mentioned.
I like that word. I confess to that. Yeah, it is.
Incidentally, we are all relieved to see that you've not been defenestrated from the Parliamentary Committee on IT, in the new order. So
I was fearing or expecting that, but it didn't happen. So I'm delighted.
That's good. And maybe a couple of other words like enthusiast, for the I think the 50s part and so on and so forth. But for some reason, you have this caricature of using very big words, difficult words. Does that irritate you? Does that it's okay because you find words attributed to you. You find there's a narrative out there where people are having a ball with terrorism or terrorosaurus, as you call it. I really want to know what you thought of that.
Well, I mean, I think, frankly, it did irritate me at the beginning because I actually expostulated to people that if I could not communicate clearly, my books would not be selling well and my speeches would not find an audience and my articles would not be commissioned by editors and so on and so forth. Therefore, I assumed I was a clear communicator and what is more, a comprehensible one.
In fact, you have an essay about writing with short words, easy communicative language and so on. In fact, in this collection, there's one as well. Yeah,
that's right. So, I mean, I really genuinely have prided myself on being somebody who wrote to be read. I was never one of those people who would write something for his private satisfaction, put it away in a drawer, and not care about communicating. I was very interested in communication, and communicating was part of what, as far as I was concerned, the whole purpose of writing was all about. And therefore, I was irritated when people assumed or implied that my English was incomprehensible. And it really all began with one particular tweet where I let fly at a particularly egregiously offensive television anchor, whom I also then sued for defamation, but our legal process works in stately ways, so the case hasn't moved anywhere. And I used a word which I honestly have been using since debates at St. Stephen's College in the early 90s, but which for some reason was unfamiliar in India, namely farrago. Farrago.
All right.
Well, cattle class is another example where these things can go wrong, I'm afraid. Yeah. But when I used farrago, the Oxford English Dictionary tweeted in puzzlement that they couldn't understand why suddenly there had been 1 million searches for the word farrago on their dictionary site within a few hours, whereas there hadn't been 1 million sort of in the history of their dictionary, and they didn't understand why. It would get at most 1 or 2 lookups every year. And the reason was because Indians discovered this word, and then thereafter, of course, the caricature began. Now, after getting irritated, I decided that didn't serve me, didn't do me very much good. First, it didn't silence the people who caricatured me. And secondly, as a politician, you don't want to go around sort of looking or sounding pissed off all the time, because it doesn't do you any good. So I decided to do what in history people have often done, which is to take something negative and cheerfully accept it as a sort of positive. It is said that when the American Republican Party was caricatured as a slow and cumbersome elephant by cartoonists, rather than reacting in an irritated way, they decided to make the elephant their official symbol.
Right.
And to this day, the Republican Party is drawn or depicted as an elephant. But now the sting is gone because it's no longer something against them; it's something they do themselves. So I decided, why don't I take this criticism and turn it to my advantage? And I did two things that were purely tongue-in-cheek, but which reinforced the image. One was when a particular chief minister who had run for election as an ally of ours against the BJP abruptly switched horses and joined the BJP side. And I tweeted one word. I said, snollygoster. Definition: a shrewd and unprincipled politician. First used United States, 1845. Most recent use today. And I didn't have to name the politician or the state or the situation. That tweet was enough, and snollygoster suddenly got into the Indian political vocabulary. Similarly, when my book, The Paradoxical Prime Minister, came out in late 2018, before the elections of 2019, I was asked by the publishers to announce on social media this book was coming. And I was very happy to do so, because obviously one wants to publicize his book, but I knew that every other day some author or the other is tweeting what could make my announcement stand out. So I said, well, since in any case this book is bound to be dismissed by everybody as yet another opposition rant, and I want to assure the readers there's more to it than that, I tweeted, my new book, The Paradoxical Prime Minister, is more than just a 500-page exercise in Floccinauci nihilipilification. Now, again, that's a joke that goes back to high school days, not even college, because at some point, kids interested in English would learn the longest word in the language. Yes. It's one of the words you learn. It was a word that meant the act of estimating something or someone as worthless. But the moment I used it, of course, that tweet got multiplied hundreds of thousands of times, and the people started looking up the word. I did provide the definition, I think. If not, anyway, the definition was soon out. And then, to my horror, parents started getting their little toddlers to mug up this word and record little videos and send them to me. And whenever I went to my constituency, some poor little Malayali high-aspiring kid wheeled out to recite Floccinauci nihilipilification to me.
So Shashi, unbeknownst to you, you're a problem out there.
I am a problem, especially for little kids with overambitious parents.
Yeah, right. So, but interesting, in this day and age when technology also determines, I think, language to an extent. For instance, I've read about Ernest Hemingway, that he wrote the way he did with very short, crisp words, because, when he was reporting, he had to send his reports on the telegraph in those days, right? And so you paid per word. And so he economized on words, and he writes somewhere, he admits somewhere that put a premium on choosing the words which were shorter, and therefore he became very parsed in the way he wrote. He owned his writing.
The opposite of Earl Stanley Gardner. Yes. It was famously said of Earl Stanley Gardner that when somebody was shot in his detective novels, the Perry Mason novels, it would always be bang, 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 because he was paid 10 cents per word. It's never one bang. That's 20 cents less.
Yes. And in Kerala, for instance, take Kamala Das, and Soraya, she knew little. I mean, she had a limited vocabulary of Malayalam.
Oh.
And yet she's seen as one of the very good writers in Malayalam. I've heard that, it's not as if she had knew all the Sanskritized words. She used very simple Malayalam, but she wrote beautifully because, and I think I remember her saying to some of us who visited us that the limitation of the vocabulary helped her, have clarity in terms of what she expressed. So do you think creating words, you are what you call a logophile, right? Your love for your words, it becomes a problem that, you unknown to yourself, not that you're doing that, but I'm saying, do you become denser in terms of the communication? You spoke about penetrative quality in communication, being lean and, parse in terms of what you express. Is that a liability now, particularly? So how would you see language evolving with technology, especially now when the millennial generation, they're using emoticons, they're using casual words, there are neologisms, there's a newly minted language, if you like, which keeps pace with technology. Do you think we need to shed this whole literary, kind of celebration in terms of language and look at it being more lean and functional and attractive and newly minted, to repeat what I said?
I actually agree with you, and except that in my case, my vocabulary doesn't come from straining for effect or trying to acquire words to show off. I happen to have read. No, I know
you're not doing it.
And I just have read very widely, and so words pop up as the most appropriate ones to use in a particular sentence to convey a particular idea, and they turn out to be words that are actually quite unfamiliar to many people. And so then that reinforces the image that I'm being difficult. But as you said earlier, for the most part, my writing is not particularly, shall we say, incomprehensible. It is complex and dense. I write a traditional conventional sentence, which has complexity built into it. I actually find that ideas that flow in the English language when you are writing often require both length and multiple subordinate clauses if you want to convey a complex idea that contains within it a certain level of ambiguity or even a willingness to acknowledge a contradiction inherent in the idea you're expressing. All of that requires some complexity. And I tweeted the other day a quote by John Banville saying that, complex ideas require complex language and that he's tired of being attacked for being too dense because simple ideas can be expressed simply. Complex ideas require complex language. Now, this is a debate one can have, but in my own case, I have this sort of, I didn't realize that Kamala Das of Suraya, whom I always spoke to in English, had a limited Malayalam vocabulary, but I can assure you I have a limited Malayalam vocabulary. And my political speeches are essentially operating within a rather narrow template, but no one has ever accused them of being incomprehensible because I'm communicating very directly to my voters and my listeners, and for that matter, to television interviewers in Malayalam, without having to either use too much of English in the Manglish that we, you see this in Hindi a lot. There's a lot of English words being tossed into Hindi sentences by our politicians, even those for whom Hindi is very much their first language. Now, Malayalam is my mother tongue in the classic sense of the term. It is literally the language my mother grew up speaking and arguably was for much of her life her first language and her principal language. It wasn't for me. I was brought up in a household where English was heard more often than Malayalam. I went to school in English, I communicated with my sisters, my friends in English, etc. So for me, the Malayalam that I've picked up and articulated in my political life is really a Malayalam I've picked up on the job, as it were, and therefore it's functional without being complex.
And you made the effort, unlike your predecessor in Trivandrum, Krishna Menon, who
made all his speeches in English.
In English, absolutely. I think we've run out of time, so I can't resist this. When I was thinking about these big words, you've become synonymous with big word for some, unjustly actually, but in the social media. So I was just thinking that if Shashi Tharoor were to be courting someone in a much younger age, shall we say, and he had to tell her, and one thing led to the other, and it came to asking whether you could kiss the lady, you'd say, may we,
osculate.
Say kiss?
Osculate.
Or would you say, shall we indulge in the anatomical juxtaposition of two orbicularis oris muscles in a state of contraction? Because that, I believe, is a scientifically accurate definition of a kiss. So
there you are.
That's where you are.
And if she says yes, then because she didn't understand the question, she gets what she wants. But in these days of Me Too, that isn't particularly wise.
It's not a good idea at all.
Not a good idea.
Not a good idea at all. Anyway,
better be clear and direct.
Thank you very much, Shashi. It's wonderful speaking to you. I mean, we could go on and on but the book, I think, says it all. And I'd once again remind those who are listening to this to get hold of a copy. And it's wonderful, easy reading, and there's a lot there. And as I said, Shashi Tharoor at his raconte best. All the best.
Thank you so much, Shashi. So it's Pride, Prejudice and Punditry, The Essential Shashi Tharoor, the title of the book.
Yes.
Take good care and lovely talking to you.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you for a very relevant discussion on all things that are crucial to a sensitive world: life, literature and politics. It was, as we expected, candid and contemplative. Our next session is Jungle Nama, a story for our times, Amitabh Ghosh in conversation with Shomak Ghoshal. For a while now, the Sundarban's strange and wild landscape has fascinated writer Amitabh Ghosh. The powerful impression it has made also became the heart of his novel The Hungry Tide. Jungle Nama is Amitabh Ghosh's verse adaptation of an episode from the legend of Bon Bibi, a tale popular in the villages of the Sundarban and evokes the wonder of the Sundarbans through its poetry, accompanied by stunning artwork by the renowned artist Salman Toor. Please allow me a moment to introduce the speakers. Amitabh Ghosh was born in Kolkata and grew up in India, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. He is the author of 2 books of non-fiction, a collection of essays and 10 novels. His books have won many prizes and he holds 4 honorary doctorates. His work has been translated into more than 30 languages and he has served on the jury of the Locarno and the Venice Film Festivals. In 2018, he became the first English language writer to receive India's highest literary honor, the Jnanpith Award. His most recent publication is Jungle Nama, an adaptation of a legend from the Sundarbans with artwork by Salman Toor. His new book, The Nutmeg's Curse, Parables for a Planet in Crisis, a work of non-fiction, was published in October 2021. He lives in Brooklyn, New York, with his wife, the writer Deborah Baker. Shomak Ghoshal is a writer and the books editor of Mint Lounge, based in Bengaluru. He is the author of 10 Indian heroes who help people live with dignity. Welcome, Mr. Ghosh and Mr. Ghoshal. Over to you.
Thank you, Amita, for speaking to me. It's a real privilege to talk about a book which I've loved very much, and partly because it speaks of a region I come from and sort of its folklores and tales. Before we begin our conversation about the book proper, I thought I'd ask you about your relationship with the Sundarbans, which has been quite a long affair for now, spanning several books and many years of your life.
Well, first of all, Shomak, it's a great pleasure to speak to you. I'm so glad we could do this together, and my thanks to the Hindu Literary Festival for inviting me to be here. It's really wonderful to be able to present this book to this audience. Yes, the Sundarban has been a very large part of my life, for a long, long time. And one reason for that is that my uncle, one of my father's brothers, used to be a school teacher in Goshaba in the Sundarban. He taught there for really most of his life. And then after he stopped being a school teacher, he was an estate manager for the big Sundarban estate or the Hamilton estate. So, when we were children, we would go to visit him. And in many ways, the Sundarban left a really powerful impression on me, because it's such a strange and wild landscape. And then from about 2000 onwards, I became even more deeply involved in the Sundarban because I started to do research for the Hungry Tide. And, that was also the time exactly when I became very aware of climate change. Because back then, you could already see the effects of climate change in the Sundarban. You could see the effects of sea level rise. You could see the effects of intensifying cyclones. So the Sundarban has really played a very important part, not just in my life as a writer, but really in everything I've thought.
It's so interesting that you talk about this expanse of time that you've spent. And when we think of the Sundarban, and especially, the Bon Bibi Johranama story that you have retold, we think of timeless epics and timeless appeals. And I find this interesting juxtaposition of the timelessness of the story and the changing, flavor of the times that it captures. Would you like to talk about a little about the background to the book, about how Jangalnama came about from these, ancient folklores?
Sure. It's a curious thing about the chronology of the Bon Bibi legend. So I should explain that Jangalnama is a retelling of one episode from the legend of Bon Bibi, who is like the reigning being of the forest. And the story of Bon Bibi, we don't know, when it was created or how far back it goes. But I suspect it has very deep roots, in the soil of Bengal. And it's very similar to many other stories, that are told within Bengal, with the interesting twist that the Bon Bibi legend actually begins in Makkah and Medina. Bon Bibi is the daughter of a fakir. She is sent back from Makkah and Medina to come and restore peace and order to the Sundarban. So, the really remarkable thing about the Bon Bibi legend is how wonderfully hybrid it is. It really brings together many different traditions into this patchwork. And while the story is timeless in a sense, in the sense that it's really about creating a balance between humanity and the wilderness, it's also not without a date. Because, as often happens, as you often see with, Southall paintings, cars figure in them, aeroplanes figure in them, Similarly, in the Bon Bibi legend, there's talk about carriages and so on, right in the... So, there are references to quite contemporary phenomena. So it's thought, the written versions of it are thought to have been transcribed in the late 19th century. But I'm sure the legend far predated that and that it had many other lives and many other iterations.
So I want to come to the retelling of the story a little later, because to me, it's a very curious mixture of, visual and the oral that comes through in your text. Because the Bon Bibi legend is sort of told, as it were, and scroll painters of Bengal have shown it around and told the story of Bon Bibi. And then there is the written record. So I was wondering if you have seen any performances of Bon Bibi legend and if that has impacted the writing of this text itself.
Yes, I've certainly watched some of the Jatra versions, which are put on by traveling Jatra companies in the Sundarban. And these companies are, as you know, they're really kind of take you back to the time of Shakespeare or something, because the female roles acted by men often, so it's a very remarkable experience just watching those performances. But I can't claim to have sat through an entire Bun Bibi enactment because they go on all night, and it's often not very comfortable. But yes, I've certainly watched them with much interest. So again, the legend exists in these multiple iterations. Each Jatra company will tell the story in its own way. It'll emphasize different aspects of it. Similarly, people tell the story of Bun Bibi all the time when you're in the Sundarban. They refer to things, just as, say, in let's say, UP, Bihar, people will often refer to the Ramayana, Mahabharata, the song of Alha, and so on. Similarly, in the Sundarban, these mythological references permeate everyday life, and they create a kind of charter for everyday life. So yes, there are all these different versions of it, and I've stressed certain elements of the legend for my own adaptation.
In fact, I was coming to that, the elements that you have picked up on. A lot of them have to do with sort of, like a morality play kind of almost aspect to it. There's a kind of fabulous structure to it in which, evil is punished and good is rewarded. And then at some point at the end of the book, in the afterword, you write that this is a child's story which has been now given a second life as an adult narrative. Would you like to talk about this process of adaptation and how, a very, very sort of regional tale embedded in certain specific circumstances became a universal story of climate change and environmental degradation?
Shumak, I don't think I've said that it's a child story. I've said, in fact, the opposite, that within the sort of capsule of modernity, so to speak, a story like this might be thought of as a child story, but that it's not a child story, in fact. And in the Sundarban, it's not at all a child story. I mean, it's a story that's absolutely hugely influential in people's lives and in the lives of everyone, the hunters, the people who go into the forest to gather stuff and so on, the fishermen. So it's a very important aspect of people's lives. And that's exactly the part of it that I wanted to recapture. I think that the story that, the moral of the story of Bun Bibi and the story of Jungle Nama is, how do you find a balance between the new needs of human beings and the needs of the wilderness? And the needs of other beings, the needs of animals like tigers and so on. So, this is a very important story for our times, I think, because, I don't know if you're aware of the work of a Native American botanist by the name of Robin Wall Kimmerer. She's written a wonderful book called Braiding Sweetgrass. And she is a scientifically trained botanist and so on, but she teaches classes in ecology and so on. And she writes about how, within the Western tradition, there are so few stories about finding a balance with nature. Whereas for indigenous peoples everywhere and forest peoples everywhere, especially within our Adivasi traditions, this idea that, that you have to leave to nature a certain part, that you have to find some kind of balance with the needs of the earth. That's absolutely central, is absolutely planted at the foundation, of Adivasi culture, of indigenous culture. And really, so in that sense, it's very much a part of forest cultures everywhere. And I think it's a fundamental, it's an absolutely fundamental lesson for today. It's also a lesson which exists in many, many other iterations. I mean, for example, the story of Monasha Devi, the goddess of snakes, is very similar. It's about finding she represents the voices of other beings. Whereas the merchant, Chad Saudagar, he represents the profit motive, a sort of reigning, just seizing whatever it can. And I must say that I think in those ways, these old stories really do capture something that is very essential about the world.
Right. I guess I badly kind of paraphrased that bit where you say in the before times, stories like this one would have been considered childlike,
yes,
and thus fair for children. So that's what I meant when I said that it was meant as a children's story, but it's not, definitely.
No, absolutely. I don't feel that it's a children's story.
Not at all, not at all. And also the very modern quality of this story. I'm also thinking of Gun Island, which carries the traces of Sundarban into it, and the myths and the stories from that place. How you juxtapose the very modern world that you set your story in with those very ancient, structures of feeling and behavior. So I just wondered if you would like to talk briefly about Monasha Mongol and its place in Gun Island, especially.
That's a very interesting question. Yes, I mean, the Monasha Mongol Kabbu was completely central to the writing of Gun Island. It was in reading the Padma Puran, which is actually one of the best retellings of the Monasha legend, that the idea of Gun Island came to me. So as you remember, Gun Island begins with a temple to Monasha Devi being found in the Sundarban. And can I tell you a story about that? It's such an uncanny thing with Gun Island. I've had so many of these experiences. But just last month, a geologist who teaches at Columbia University, who researches, subsidence in the Gangetic Delta, wrote to me and said that he had found a temple just like the one that I described in Gun Island, and he sent me pictures, and it was completely uncanny because I had no idea that such a temple existed. It's near Khulna, this temple.
Right.
And, it's also in Gun Island, the temple is built in the Bishnupuri style. This actual temple is also built in the Bishnupuri style. And it looks exactly very much like the temple that I envisaged in Gun Island. So, it's strange how the past and how, especially I would say the 17th century, is coming back to haunt us, in so many ways.
I think reality is stranger than fiction. That's what it's telling us, really.
It is much stranger than fiction. Fiction doesn't even come close.
So coming back to Jangalnama, I wanted to talk about the compositional aspect of it, especially the technical part of it. This is the first time you have written something long in the verse form, right?
Yes, and I'm very glad that you refer to it as verse, because it's just narrative verse. It's not poetry in the modern sense, and the people, I mean, even Biprudash Pipilai, who wrote one of the great Mongol Kabbos about Monasha Devi, I don't think they thought of themselves as poets in the modern sense. And certainly the writers who wrote the Bonbibi Johuranamas don't seem to think of themselves as poets in that sense at all, in the sense in which, say, Rabindranath Tagore thought of himself as a poet. I mean, this is an older way of dealing of telling a story. So the verse form, which is the Poyar form, and really the Poyar form is the major form in all the Bengali Mangal Kavyas, and it's also the form in which a lot of other Bengali folk tales are narrated. And I can see why it's such an interesting and powerful form now, having dealt with it for a long time. Because even in the Hungry Tide, several parts of the Hungry Tide are actually composed in the Poyar form, but you can't tell because it doesn't scan on the page like it does over here. So the Poyar form is basically rhyming couplets of 24 syllables, with a A-B-B form. And it's a very simple form in a certain sense, except that each line of each 12 or 14 syllable line has a caesura or a break in the middle. It's a simple and flexible form in a certain way. It's a form that's meant to be chanted. It's meant to be sung. Indeed, in the Mongol Kabbos, always every passage is preceded by the name of a rag, which makes it quite clear that it's meant to be sung in, say, Patamanjari or whatever. So, it's a form which establishes itself as something that exists in order to be spoken out aloud, to be chanted, to be performed, to be sung, which is a very different way from experiencing a text from what we have today. You and I, we grew up, reading in our heads. Even as very little children, we never read aloud, I mean, until maybe you read aloud until you were 4 or 5 or something. But after that, we learned to read silently because that's what our education tells us to do. But we should not forget that, reading in silence was not a practice until the late 17th century, late 18th century, sorry. So it only became a sort of a reading practice quite recently, I would say. Before that, reading too was a kind of collective exercise, where people always read out aloud, where people experienced a text together, just as many people do today, with texts like the Ramayana or the Mahabharata or whatever. So I wanted to go back, to try and recreate a text which would open itself in this way, to exist in these multiple iterations, where it can be sung, where it can exist with pictorial elements, especially within, palm leaf manuscripts. Palm leaf manuscripts were always illuminated in different ways. So I wanted to experiment with all of that. But what was also really interesting for me was to discover, what a remarkably flexible and powerful form the Poyar meter is. It can carry a story, it adds rhythm to a story, it adds its own momentum. And that's why the meter became actually a protagonist within the story. I mean, the magic of the story is inheres in the meter. So it's when that's absolutely, part of my adaptation. It's certainly not within the Bonbibi legend as such. But I just thought it was so beautiful. And actually, this idea was suggested to me even by one of our great poets, Leela Gandhi. It was a wonderful sort of exercise, because in normal life, we don't rhyme. We don't use meter, we don't rhyme, we don't use rhythm in speech. And it's once you begin to use rhythm and rhyme that you discover actually what a powerful form it is. And the strange thing about it also that I discovered is that, especially with rhyme and meter, when you're doing it, it uses a part of your brain that's not used at all. I mean, you can literally feel it, you can feel it in your head. You feel, this part of my brain I've never used before, and it's suddenly coming into use. So it's really exciting, and that's why you can see the energy of, say, rap music.
Right.
Those guys are using a part of their brain which is not normally used. And it was wonderful. I worked quite closely with my Italian translators who've actually translated it also using the Poyar meter. And they've done, again, a truly wonderful job, which just shows you, that there's a power and a strength in the meter itself, that exists outside individual intention or individual ability.
Right. I was just wondering that bit about, the Poyar being the saving grace in the poem, as it were, that the protagonist is saved by the power of poetry. Is it not also part of the legend, or is it entirely your own addition to the text?
That is entirely my interpretation.
It's quite a fantastical addition, I must say.
Thank you. It's the kind of thing that would occur to someone who spent his whole life doing, writing. Whereas this text exists for people who are out there fishing or collecting firewood or, thinking about completely different things. So, it's not something that would occur to them.
I suppose the quality of chanting is also present somewhere because it is somewhat kind of a religious text. It's not a religious text in the very sort of narrow sense, but it sort of pays homage to a goddess. So in that sense, it probably is also chanted.
It is chanted. And certainly, there are many people who would interpret Bonbibi as a goddess. But in fact, in the text, and we have to remember here that this text is the followers of this text, the users of this text, they're Muslims as well as Hindus. So across the Sundarban region, extending into Bangladesh, there are many, many Muslims who also use this text. For them, Bonbibi is like a female peer, and throughout the Muslim world, there are peers with magical powers. I mean, even in Egypt or, wherever you go within the Arab world, there have always been these peers and various kinds of saints and sheikhs, and who have these magical powers. So throughout this text, within the textual tellings of the Bon Bibi legend, her miracles are always described as karamati, which comes from the Arabic karamat, which is exactly the word that's used for peers, the magical powers of peers. So I think that's one of the interesting things about this legend, which is that it presents a different face to different communities, to different theological traditions, to different belief systems. And it needn't contradict any of those belief systems.
Right. I was coming to the secular aspect of it, but you already brought it in. And I wanted to also ask you about the coming together of various vocabularies from different cultures into your translation. It's an English translation, but it's also peppered with words from, Persian and other languages, Arabic. Would you like to talk about these loan words and how they came into being as part of your translation?
The actual texts, which are called Bon Bibi Johuranama, we have two versions of them printed, and they circulate widely within the Sundarban. This is actually, this is a neglected part of what we call Bengali literature. There's this enormous tradition of Bengali folk literature, stories about Ghaji Pir, Shottu Pir, Shottu Narayan, these texts were constantly printed and reprinted, by small town presses and so on. And you can buy them for the old ones you could buy for 4 annas. Now you have to spend like 2 or 3, 10, 20 rupees. And they circulated a lot and are quite easy to find. The vocabulary is incredibly hybrid. Incredibly hybrid. As I said, the words used like karamati and so on. And it's very much shot through with Arabic, with Persian. So actually, I think someone who speaks standard Bangla would have considerable difficulty in understanding these texts, because simply because the vocabulary is so unusual and so strange, in a way. So I wanted to recreate that same effect in English. And of course, I've done that before, with my Ibis trilogy, which really does experiment a lot with, hybrid vocabularies in English. So all of that came very easily to me. And I've always really enjoyed playing with this hybrid aspect of the English language.
Maybe you would like to read out a passage from a book, just to give us a flavor of how it sounds,
Sure, I'll do that.
Then we can resume the conversation again.
Yes. So this is from this is sort of the climactic moment in the book when Dukhe is abandoned in the forest by his rich uncle Dhona, who has made a pact with the tiger demon Dokhin Rai. So Dhona is sailing away, abandoning Dukhe. Stepping into his ship, Dhona unloosed the rope. Watching from afar, Dukhe now gave up all hope. It's just as I thought. Uncles left me and set sail. Death awaits me now. That'll be the end of this tale. Dokhin Rai, exultant, feasted his eyes on Dukhe. The rich ones kept his word. He's left me my prey. His maw began to tingle as he watched his prize. In an instant he assumed his tiger disguise. How long has it been since human flesh came my way? What bliss to find a victim like this sad Dukhe. On the far mud bank, Dukhe caught sight of the beast. Its amber eyes glittered as it watched its feast. With its nose a twitch, it sniffed the spoor of its game. Its ochre stripes shimmered like tongues of burning flame. That's no mere tiger, thought Dukhe, panic-stricken. It's Dhona's master, come to collect his portion. Then at last his mother's words rang in his head. Use the meter of wonder, called Bon Bibi, she'd said. But how to find the words in the state of panic, with the beast about to spring, grim and satanic? There we are.
That's lovely.
Thank you. I just to brag a little bit, just 2 days ago, I got a message from my old friend Shukanta Chaudhary, who's of course one of the great literary scholars of our time, and he said he was really astonished by my use of Poyar in English. He hadn't thought that it would be possible. So I think actually it's the meter itself which is the truly remarkable form.
It's a very beautiful, elegant meter, in spite of its very rhyming scheme and very sort of structured scheme.
That's right.
To me, it was also the encounter with foreign words, like the way you intersperse a word like khidmatgar in a very otherwise English line. And the reader kind of stumbles and halts and savors that word for a moment before they move on. And I remember speaking to you earlier where you once mentioned to me that in etymology, one encounters history. And in this translation for me, there was this real sense of history flowing through the lines, because you gather so much influence from so many places without obviously, making it evident to us. Would you like to talk about this idea of history flowing into this text through language and the afterlife of language especially?
Well, that's such an interesting question, Shomuk. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I think etymology really creates a tapestry of history. The word khidmatgar is a good example. No one uses the word khidmatgar anymore. I mean, not in English, not in Hindustani, not in Hindi. We never say khidmatgar anymore because it's a word that's become, that's kind of faded away. But, if you look at the longer Oxford English Dictionary, you'll find that there are many entries under khidmatgar. I mean, it's spelled in various different ways, but in the sense that it's a part of the Oxford English Dictionary, I think we can say that khidmatgar is actually an English word. It's a word that's not in use in many languages anymore, but when we see that word, we immediately know what it means. There are many such words in English, which has left a profound trace on the English language, especially in the description of textiles. After all, the English first came to Bengal because of textiles, Bengal and Gujarat. So there are so many kinds of, Indian words that have entered the English language through textiles, and that are perfectly alive today. But we never make that connection. For example, dungarees, dungaree is very much a live word in American English. People wear dungarees. It's a particular kind of, outfit, you might call it. But dungaree comes from Dongri Fort in Mumbai, Similarly, there's so many kinds of muslin and so on. Alli Balli, was a grade of muslin. And all those words come into this, into Jungle Nama as well. And I've always delighted in using those words because, to me, they bring history alive. And it's, I just really enjoyed it. So again, one of the ways in which Jungle Nama is really a story, it's very much a story of Bengal, is that it's also a story of sailing. It's a story about these merchants who set sail, who sail, sail towards the sea. And again, the Manisha Mongol Kabbo is also exactly that. It's a story of sailing. And in that way, the entire folklore of Bengal is completely different from the folklore of, say, UP, Bihar. For Bengalis, there was no Kala Pani.
Yeah.
Bengali merchants went, they sailed here and there. The Manisha Mongol Kabbo is filled with descriptions of Lanka and here and there, many places which are not actually even identified to this day, So this is a complete difference, And I think it's important to recognize this, that, what is taken for, as it were, a hegemonic Indic culture is not hegemonic at all if you look at it from the peripheries, like if you look at it from Bengal. And you can call Bengal a periphery in some sense, but Bengal is huge. I mean, it's almost like 340 million people. It's I think the fourth or fifth most spoken language in the world.
Exactly.
So I mean, this is not a marginal literature. It's not a marginal language. It's a language which is increasingly, absolutely a global language. I hear Bengali everywhere. Here, I'm speaking to you from Goa. In the last 20, 30 years, I've really seen this change happen in front of my own eyes. The entire working population of Goa now is Bengali. You hear Bangla spoken all over the streets. Similarly, in Brooklyn, the people who work in Brooklyn, who repair houses and so on, are Bengalis. Yeah.
Rome and the Bangladeshis in Rome, in Gun Island.
Yes, I'm sure you've seen that.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, this is a phenomenon that's occurred really within our own lifetimes. I mean, the ways in which Bangla has really become, as we would say in Bangla, Shorbogati, it's everywhere.
Right. I mean, it's so interesting that, we have these stories of Bengali merchants sailing off in pursuit of wealth, commerce, and ordinarily we wouldn't associate Bengalis with business very much. There's a kind of Bengali kind of hesitancy about that in the modern age. So we definitely had a very different origin story.
Well, I'd like to say something about that, if that's okay with you.
Of course.
If you look at the Bengal Chamber of Commerce reports from the early 20th century or late 19th century, you'll see that, in fact, there were many, many Bengali entrepreneurs, many Bengali firms. Unfortunately, I think what happened in Bengal is that and again, a lot of this has to do with the opium trade, which became, the single most important trade in Eastern India for 150 years, And the opium trade was conducted under monopoly conditions by the British through the entire period of East India Company rule and later. So, it was unlike Bombay, where individual entrepreneurship was really rewarded. In Bengal, and specifically in Calcutta, it was monopoly that was always rewarded. So Bengal became the seat of, let's say, not just the opium industry, but the tea industry, which was completely monopolistic in the sense that it was produced on these absolutely racially structured plantations where the managers were white and the labor were essentially, they worked under conditions that were akin to slavery. So what we had really in Bengal were these appalling monocultures, and I think it's those things that ultimately created an absolute breakdown, within the economic fiber of Eastern India. Just think about it. I mean, historically, the richest part of India, the part of India that was the most productive, that produced the most number of intellectuals, writers, etc., was Bihar, Pataliputra. I mean, going back to the time of Ashoka, this was the richest part, the richest, most productive part of the Indian subcontinent. What really destroyed it was truly, this opium monoculture, which the British imposed upon it, going back to the late 18th century. And there are studies to prove this now, in certain districts where opium was, as it were, forcibly cultivated. You can see the development outcomes to this day lag far behind a neighboring district where opium was not cultivated. Because in order to enforce opium cultivation, they had to create subsidiary police forces. They created these entire structures of corruption. They built fewer schools because all government money went into creating, police, etc. And these have left long, long lingering effects. It's not that Bengal was not an entrepreneurial place. It was really these structures of the colonial economy that created, as it were, a particular pattern of underdevelopment.
Right. What Jangalnama to me also revives or reminds us is that, this artificial distinction between high culture and low culture that we have created, of certain texts having a canonical status and the others being folk literature. And your retelling of the story kind of breaks through all those barriers and boundaries and constructs and gives it a kind of place of truly rich literature, irrespective of how it is told, narrated. Would you like to talk about this aspect of the text a bit?
Shumok, again, that's really such an interesting question, because after all, let's face it, in writing about the climate crisis, in writing about our planetary crisis today, the thing that strikes me most powerfully as a writer is that what have we lost in modern literature? And what we really lost is the voice of the non-human, the voice of the non-human other, That is essentially what the kind of literature that modernity produces. It places the human at the center of everything. It produces this whole structure of what's called humanism, in a very approbatory way, as though that were a good thing, that only humans are matter and all else is expendable. And that's exactly what has happened. I mean, if you look at all kinds of pre-modern literatures, including Western European pre-modern literatures, whether you look at the Iliad and the Odyssey, or you look at the Norse sagas, they're filled with non-human voices. It's only, within the structures of modernity that emerge, after the 17th century, but, intensify in the 19th century, that you have a complete suppression of non-human voices. Very rarely some sorts of non-human agents figure in important literature like Moby Dick. But so if you think about it, what really is this modernist literature about? And it's fundamentally a literature written by elites, produced by elites, and consumed by elites, And there you see so clearly, actually, especially within Bengali literature. The literature that say, for example, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, pioneered, and he was a big theorist and of literature, and he was constantly condemning a certain kind of Bengali writing because he said it was fabulistic, it was not realistic, it was not about what he thought of as the real world. It was about various kinds of non-human things and so on. So for him, that was literature simply because it belonged within a sort of Western canon of modernity. But at the same time, Bengali literature was producing this vast amount of, many, many texts, many, many stories, like, as I said, the Bon Bibi Johuranama, the various stories about Ghazi Pir, about Shuttu Pir and Shuttu Narayan, and so many, many stories of this kind, And why, if you look at Bengali literary criticism, there's so much writing, about Rabindranath Tagore, about Bankim Chandra, and quite rightly, they're very interesting writers. But there's almost nothing written about these other texts. Why? It's because, of the ways in which elites conceive of literature. In fact, the few people who write about these other literatures, they're almost all either in Bangladesh, and there are a couple of major scholars. Tony Stewart just has a very interesting new book out on these subjects, and they're in the United States. In Kolkata, certainly, I don't think there are many people who look at this literature seriously, which is a terrible thing,
Yeah.
Because even in the 1920s, there's the great Ballads of Bengal, book. And there's a whole cohort of scholars, in early 20th century Bengal who were digging into these texts, creating, a canon of these texts. So this is one of the great, Dinesh Chandra Sen, for example, his Ballads of Bengal, it's truly worth reading. It's in many volumes, but especially the introduction is so much worth reading, because he says there, that the language of these folk tales is very different from standard Bangla. And he talks about how he loves the language even more because it's the language that he heard growing up, amongst ordinary people. Very different from the highly Sanskritized Bangla that is used in many kinds of literary texts. So yes, I think various kinds of elitism really came together to marginalize these texts. And I think it's very important for us to find a way back to bringing these stories back to a literary mainstream, which is where they belong.
Right. And these are extremely exciting stories. They are, as you said in the beginning, like Shakespeare's mass entertainment. They're meant for sort of people to consume and enjoy as well.
Absolutely. The great thing about the Mangal Kavyas, especially, is that, apart from the fact that they're written in verse, they read exactly like novels. There are long sections of dialogue. They describe what is eaten by whom in these feasts, so long descriptions of food. But at the same time, there are also descriptions of very real things that matter within the ecosystem of a place like Bengal. Snakes, storms, famines, droughts, all of these figure in them in a way. So, in so many ways, these texts are actually more responsive to the ecology of Bengal than many modern texts, I would say.
Also, they are visually so arresting because they have this real cinematic quality about them. Like this book can be a short Bollywood movie, really, like with all the excitement and adventure that happens in it. And part of the telling of these stories, I know, was with scroll paintings. Sometimes people used to show all these images. And I love it that you have Salman Toor's wonderful work in this book, which really gives a real heft to the book as well, as an object, as a beautiful object to hold and possess. My last question to you is about your collaboration with Salman, and if you would like to tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I've known Salman since he was a student. He studied at the Pratt Institute in New York, which is just down the road from my house in Brooklyn. So I knew him through various, and over the years, he became a really good friend, a part of a sort of whole community of Desi writers and intellectuals and so on, which includes, for example, Meera Nair and her husband, Mahmood Mamdani, and many of us, So we have our own sort of little gharana, if you like, and they were very much a part of it. And from the moment I first saw Salman's work, I knew that this guy is just superhumanly talented, the way that he can transform ideas into images on the page. I mean, it's these things. There's always, but when you're in the presence of real talent, there's something uncanny in that, And Salman is exactly that. His talent is not an ordinary talent; it's something completely uncanny and extraordinary. And I always knew this. So when I thought of this, when I conceived of this whole Jungle Nama project, from the start, I wanted to work with an artist, and the first artist I thought of was Salman. But Salman's become incredibly sort of successful, in the last few years. And I knew that he had a big show opening at the Whitney, which is kind of completely unprecedented for an artist of his age from South Asia and so on. So I was hesitant to ask him, but then this pandemic intervened and his show was postponed. So he had some time. So it was a truly astonishing experience, I mean, he loved the text. He saw Salman, apart from everything else, is very engaged with environmental issues. He's a big reader, reads a lot and so on. Every day for about a month, we would talk. We would talk about different passages in the book, what might be a good passage for him to work on. And, at the end of the day, he would produce these absolutely miraculous images. They would just turn up on my screen and I would be mesmerized, just stare at them for hours, really. So it was a wonderful experience. It was a truly wonderful experience because I've never collaborated before. That's what contemporary writing is. A writer sits at his desk and his or her desk and, everything happens inside their own head. But this was a wonderful thing to collaborate in this way. And I do hope, that going ahead, I'm able to do more collaborations of this kind, because I think one of the problems really, as I said in The Great Derangement, is that writing needs to find new forms, new ways of speaking to the world and of the world, And so one way out, I think, is to actually open ourselves to imagery, which has been so completely suppressed within modern literature.
Absolutely. And there's real pleasure in also holding and beholding the book as an object in an age when we are going to, e-readers and screen reading and all of that. A physical book like this is a real, special thing to hold.
It's so important that because it's very, that books exist as artifacts is so important, So I often tell people, I said, the closest you're ever going to come to holding an actual Salman Toor in your hands is through Jungle Nama.
That's true. I mean, this is the closest we can have to possessing his artwork, I suppose, most of us.
Well, because his work is now setting records, at auctions and so on.
Truly. Thank you, Amitav. It's always a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for sharing your thoughts on your book.
Thank you, Shomak. Thank you so much for doing this. And my thanks also to the Hindu Literary Festival for providing us this platform. Thank you.
Thank you for this fantastic session that not only celebrates the beauty of verse, its power, potential, and what it does to a writer who engages with it, but also the fact that Jungle Nama must be read for the timelessness of the story and for some fundamental lessons in finding balance and coexisting in harmony with nature. next session is A Viral World. Why viruses are necessary. Pranay Lal in conversation with Ramya Kannan. Perhaps the word most often used in the past year or so is the word virus. Viruses are the world's most abundant life form, and now when humanity is in the midst of a close encounter with their immense power, perhaps they're also the most feared. But really, do we understand viruses? Pranay Lal's Invisible Empire, The Natural History of Viruses, brings together science, history, and great storytelling to paint a fascinating picture of viruses as a major actor, not just in human civilization, but also in the human body. With rare photographs, paintings, illustrations, and anecdotes, it is a magnificent and an extremely relevant book for our times, when we are attempting to understand viruses and really examining their role in the lives of humans. A quick introduction of the speakers. Pranay Lal is a biochemist who works in public health and the environment. His first book, Indica, A Deep Natural History of the Indian Subcontinent, won the 2017 Tata Lit Prize and the World Book Fair Award, among others. His most recent book, Invisible Empire, The Natural History of Viruses, published by Penguin, presents an alternative view on the role of viruses in ecosystems and the evolutionary history of life. Ramya Kannan is the Hindu's Tamil Nadu Bureau Chief. She is passionate about health and development issues, which she has reported on for the last couple of decades and more. The past couple of years have been devoted to pursuing the SARS-CoV-2 virus in an attempt to make some sense in a world that had descended into chaos. Besides that, Ramya says she is trigger happy, shooting pictures of course, has a green thumb, and trying to keep up with her effervescent 9-year-old daughter. Mr. Lal and Ms. Kannan, over to you.
Hello and welcome to the online edition of the Lit for Life event. This year we've gone online just as everything else has. We've heard an introduction to our guest today, Pranay Lal. Hi, Pranay. But he's probably going to introduce us to a teeming, bustling world, that nearly seems like an alternate. It could be a parallel universe, an alternate universe, but in reality, it's nearly invisible. It exists with us. It very much belongs to our world. We're discussing today his fascinating book, Invisible Empire, The Natural History of Viruses. It brings to our vision, to our sight, the world of microorganisms that are generally visible only under a microscope, and seeks to establish a hierarchy virus down. Of course, Pranay, for those of you who are regulars, is no stranger to Lit for Life. His first book, Indica, Natural History of the Indian Subcontinent, was featured at the 2018 Lit for Life event. So, Invisible Empire is really a book that defies categorization. It is science, it is history, it's fascinating storytelling. And I think all of which push this book into a broader and quite indisputable category of unputdownable. So it's facts a minute, it's facts a sentence, but you still want to keep reading until the very end. The book itself, when it is published, we don't have a copy yet, but when it is published, it's likely to be a visual adventure. Just going by the PDF, I can see that it would be a visual adventure. Rare photographs, illustrations, and images that we've probably never seen before, and certainly with this kind of clarity. And it could not have come at a better time, perhaps. A friend of mine, says in jest, a scientist, Dr. says in jest, that COVID has actually been the revenge of science. Everywhere you go, there it is. Far more scientific terms have come into common parlance than you would have thought possible And who would have thought we've been bandying about terms like RT-PCR and controlled trials and quarantine, remdesivir, mucormycosis on a daily basis. Naturally, an explosion in terms of writing on medicine, research, science, journalistic and non-journalistic has happened. So in that sense, the pandemic, which has changed the world, has also changed things a bit for writing on science itself, don't you think, Pranay? We've sort of moved from the esoteric world that science writing occupies onto, the realm of the popular. And do you think this is like a watershed moment or event or year for science writing or writing on specific topics itself? No, I just wanted to add that now that the dam has sort of burst, do you think that better quality writing, more long form writing is on the way?
Well, absolutely. I think, scientists had written off infectious disease, although we had, major problems like HIV and TB, and we had recurring epidemics and, outbreaks of Ebola and Zika and others that were disrupting, but they were regional and did not grab the attention of the global economic and political order. So this was a big moment of disruption for the entire world. And I think not a single sphere of life was not affected by this. I think even the remotest communities and even communities that were detached from the field of epidemiology were shaken. We saw that economies collapsed. There was widespread migration, as if this was a replay of a film like The Day After or something like that. These were bleak, scenes that we had seen. We saw political systems change. We saw dictators emerge from, what were marginal democracies. I think all those kind of things happened, and this is what we saw in a period of just 1 year. And you're spot on that, science writing had, been pretty staid until now. We were looking at facts and we were reporting on some things like a brilliant paper, and, we presented that. But now I think while the floodgates of data and research has emerged, and, preprints and all those things that were kind of seen very marginal in a form, but people were eager to find out new information about what's happening in the field of, say, COVID research or virology or new drugs and vaccines. All those things became so imminent for people to be informed about that this became perhaps the most educative moment for biology and for epidemiology and public health and all of that. And I think you're right that, we heard things on, jargon that was actually quite difficult to understand before COVID, mRNA, cytokine storm, herd immunity, super spreading. All of this became such a common thing for people to suddenly invest their energies and try to understand this so that they could take better decisions for their businesses, for their homes, for their loved ones. So I think that has been significant. So at two levels of if you were to look at the two ends, whether we're looking at countries themselves or governments, whether governments were able to take better informed decisions and whether the science and the science communication was effective, I think that's a work in progress. I think we made some very, very poor decisions, choice of medicines and how certain countries adopted protocols based on very poor scientific understanding, versus those who did not adopt anything at all and, kind of ignored even the warnings of what the world was actually adopting. It also saw mushrooming of experts and pseudo-experts. And I think because of a lack of clarity and objectivity, there was an immense amount of misinformation that happened. And there, as you know, such a huge array of social media tools that actually fan information and disinformation. So I think where does future of science writing lie? I think it's got to be in looking at not super specialized reporting, but also looking at objectivity. I think we have to encompass the whole idea of looking at the broad questions, and that's something which I strongly believe in, is looking at the broader picture, the spaceman's perspectives of looking at a problem. It's not typically an isolated issue. It's not just ACE2 receptor. It's not just cytokine storm. There are several other things that need to be studied. For example, it's only now that we realize that we now need to start looking at microbiomes of the lung and the gut to understand why certain people develop the conditions that lead to cytokine storms and many others don't. So, those kind of things are related to a larger understanding of what is around the environment, whether it's in an individual's organ or it's outside the world of where the virus lives in. I think clearly there's no answer, but I think what you bring out quite clearly in your question also is that we are living in very interesting times. And I think how we move on from here, whether we as science writers, you and me, or the larger scientific community, the medical community, or the spheres of economics and politics, how do they interpret this very, very massive shock to humanity? How are they going to change their ways in the way they operated before COVID-19 and how they will operate now? I think that's a very serious question. I think we have made some course corrections, but I don't know if these are sufficient, because the way we are now moving ahead with a business as usual attitude, I think that is a little perturbing. I'm not sure whether all those lessons have been taken in seriously by the systems who need to have made those changes.
Right. Yeah, that's a sobering thought, and yes, I think to have a larger picture is what this epidemic has taught at least the writers, to be more readable. You have spoken about in your book about the origin of viruses naturally, and the evolutionary leap and the community level reservoirs, and how viruses do stay either in the community or in the human body for a long while, depending upon the kind of virus. So do you think we could sort this out in terms of the COVID-19 SARS-CoV-2 virus? Because it's appropriate, of course, and seems like the thing we should be talking about.
So if I read you correctly, and if I want to cut the chase, what you're asking me is whether I believe in the lab leak theory or whether I
right, exactly. Yes,
well,
yes.
This is something that I said in a talk earlier, and I forget when I'd said this, that somebody had asked me for a podcast, I think, that whether the lab leak theory is correct. And my sense was then, as it is now, is that if I were to design a virus which was supposed to create chaos the way it has, should I be designing a virus that down mutates or mutates in both ends of the spectrum while becoming more virulent or more benign? Should I be giving it the latitude of doing so? My sense is no. I mean, if I were to create a lab leak which is actually designed to cause mayhem, I would not do that. So it is not a perfect virus. It's not, while it has taken our immune system by storm, it really is not something that I would use as something that can cause the chaos that it has. I would create something more robust and something that is more persistent and does not mutate as much as it has currently. So that's one way to look at it. I think the studies that are coming out now and the two papers that have come out in Nature, both of them have found genomic signatures which suggest that a cousin of SARS-CoV-2 had actually caused an infection about 22,000 years ago in East Asia. So I think we have signatures of previous infections with human populations in Southeast Asia of related viruses. Now, has it evolved since? These are studies that will tell us about, future studies will going to tell us about this more clearly. But I think the evolution of each virus is actually like our own evolution. We are a conglomerate of several creatures put together. We have genes, we share genes with, bacteria, mosses, ferns, banana. Just about every creature has some shared genes with another. So basically, viruses and a few other factors are the ones that drive the piecing of DNA or RNA in the case of viruses that make who we are. So evolution is happening in plain sight. The thing is, we can't perceive it, and it's happening in creatures all the time. Smaller creatures see it more often than, say, certain larger creatures or more complex cellular creatures like us. So I think evolution does not have a trajectory. It's happening in different directions at different scales at different speed, and it's not going to be easy for us to predict anything in the future. But I think we are going to have several iterative steps as we try to discover our relationship with viruses, pathogens, and nature per se. And I think that's where we need to be very clear that viruses or pathogens that we treat as our enemy are enemies, of course, because they take lives. There's no doubt about that. But I think we need to accord them a certain sense of respect or certain sense of giving them a little more importance in terms of their larger role in the ecology or the space in which they operate. So I think that's the thing that has been missing. We've micro specialized in our sciences so much that we tend to forget that there are other things operating together with the microbe to cause the disease that it does. And so why is it that SARS, if the episodes that happened now happened at this time in history and not earlier? These are the questions that we should be asking ourselves. And are there other viruses or pathogens that are waiting in the wing that we should be cautious about? So I don't know if I've answered your question, but I just...
Oh, yes, of course. Certainly. I think it's also sobering, and I think that's where your book really brings the whole world of microorganisms into perspective, because what we can't see, we don't know about. So, which is why, these theories float around. But it's very interesting how you trace the development of technology on a parallel rather with science. We do know for a fact that, science or medical research rides on technology and vice versa. There is this beautiful intersection between technology and science or medicine that we are seeing increasingly these days, the development of a vaccine over a short period of time and stuff. What does this cohabitation essentially mean for future of science or research?
I think, if you look at science as in, the deep history of science, if we look at Renaissance, for example, I mean, most scientists at the time were not pure physicists or astronomers or microbiologists. I mean, they were people, they were savants, they were people with skills other than just having pure science. So if you know, it was called natural philosophy. The whole gamut of sciences were put under a larger discipline called the natural sciences or natural philosophy. And, the great thing about the sciences was that, all scientists or so-called inquisitive people, the curious people, would converge and share ideas about nature and how nature works and different processes and phenomena of nature. And somebody would look at it from the perspective of the physical forces. Some of them would look at it from the geological or the biological forces or chemical forces. So, and there would be intersections that would bring in the best from each other. So you saw a lot of interesting theories that were being propounded around the time when the discovery of the microscope happened, for example, the lenses, actually the microscope came in about 200 years later, but the fact that a polished mirror can be used to enlarge something which was minute, and for the first time when people started seeing things that were crawling on their skin or on a pinch of soil, that's what made people really fascinated about that there was a world there that needed to be explored. And there would be answers to so many things that happen around in nature that perhaps can be answered by these things, the creepy crawlies that you see. So I think the intersection of science and technology, one feeding into the other, has been something that has actually brought incremental innovation to such grand scales. And sadly, like I was mentioning earlier, I think the micro specialization of getting into biophysics and biochemistry and pure technology of making a product, I think that compartmentalization has been a bit of a question mark. And I think people are now trying to say that we now need to go back to the original period of when scientists or curious people together looked at a problem holistically. And I think that whole conversation about getting in the counterfactual, which is something very vibrant in the social sciences, but completely devoid, if I can say that, in science. I think natural phenomena needs to be explained from several sources. If there is something that we see in nature, I think there have to be 2 or 3 or 4 different explanations to the same phenomena. The science is connecting the phenomena to explain it as a whole. To me, that is fascinating. And I think there cannot be a single, simple, linear answer to anything happening in nature. So technology is a good diagnostic tool now, which kind of serves answering the questions of science, the ones that science raises, and science in turn provides a feedback on how technology can be improved. While that is fine, the larger questions of what makes science work is something that I think needs revisitation. And I think this moment in history is one where we are going to be looking at how we want to change the way we read science, we explore, or we communicate science. I think that's going to be a very, very critical moment on how we want to move from here now.
Right, that's a wonderful idea. And basically that is the scientific spirit, isn't it? It is the scientific temper and the pursuit of science. And maybe another book waiting in the wings for you on that. But so relatedly, at some point in your book, you indicate that, why our virologists might have just scratched the surface, tip of the iceberg, as it were. To quote you, the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know enough about the viruses. And even for something as complex as the human body, we have the Human Genome Project, which is, possibly mapped the human genome. How and when are we going to figure out the viruses? Do we have a timeline? Are we going to have a virus genome project? Something similar. What do you think?
It's going to be a mammoth task that we try to understand all life forms that have existed or exist now. It's going to be just too complex. I talk about 2 viruses that live in one in the ocean, the other in our body. And the most prevalent creature was not discovered until 1988. And that's the organism which Sally Chisholm at MIT, when she was doing her PhD, discovered. And this is a very tiny photosynthetic organism called Prochlorococcus. It's found in the first 8 meters of every ocean and sea, and also in some ponds and lakes. Now, this creature alone, which we hadn't discovered till the time it got discovered in the late 80s, produces and consumes about 22% of all carbon and produces 22% or roughly about that much of oxygen. Now, without this knowledge, we would not know that we need to preserve oceans. Oceans, even now, are dumps, right? So if you really want to correct climate change, you have to look at that creature. And that organism, Prochlorococcus, depends entirely on the life cycle, its own life cycle and its relationship with viruses, marine viruses that kill it. And I talk about this macabre dance that takes place between the viruses and this bacteria, and how delicate this process is. You eliminate the virus and you have a thick pea-like soup, what we call algal blooms. You have that proliferating all over the oceans. And while that consumes a lot of carbon dioxide and produces oxygen for a moment, it will kill the oceans. And eventually there's going to be massive oxygen climate crisis, oxygen carbon dioxide led crisis. Another organism which I talk about is a virus that's found in our gut, and that's a critical organism because it maintains the gut health. Now, if that virus is eliminated, you would have bloated stomachs and bacteria taking over your gut. All those things start over. Just like the ocean where it goes and spirals into chaos, your stomachs could also go into that kind of a chaos. So viruses are everywhere, and they are something that we don't know about. Now, this virus that I'm talking about, the one which controls the population of the bacteria in our gut, was discovered only in 2014. We didn't know anything about it, right? And even now, our understanding of our microbiome, the gut bacteria, the organisms that live in all over our body, including our blood, even our brains. There's a virus that has been discovered that stays inert in our brain, and we don't know what function it serves there. But what appears to be a Rip Van Winkle kind of a situation for a virus, just staying inert for generations and generations, they do play a role because there is something that they modulate in our genes, or they regulate the entry of other viruses. We don't know what they do. And I think that learning is going to be immense. And I think you're right that, the fact that we realize now that we know so little and that we now need to move forward from here is a good start by itself. But I think we must stay humble when it comes to nature and when it comes to the most humble creatures like the microbes and beetles and anything that we call germ. I think you must have seen that tirade that I've done closer to the end, where I say, let's stop calling creatures germs and bugs and critter. And, I'm just appalled when scientists in particular, or science communicators, use those words. It's so insensitive because you are categorizing creatures that have utility in other ecosystems, but you dismiss them because it has no anthropogenic function. Now, how limited, how naive can scientists themselves or science communicators themselves be? I think we now need to leave behind that, and no creature should be called by any of those names that we have called them. I think we need to have a very, very respectful. I don't know if that is the term, but I think we need to have a more sensitive way of dealing with or even annotating creatures and life forms.
Right, absolutely. And, it segues into my next question so beautifully, because not very long ago when in one of my earlier stories, I called SARS-CoV-2 a wily virus, right? And, of course, as usual, there was a hullabaloo on Twitter and people said scientists sometimes, I wonder. So they said, oh, it is, what are you saying? It's just a strand of RNA. How can it be a wily virus? It does not have a life. It doesn't even have a life. But, when I read your book, I was like, yes, because I was delighted to find, some justification for my use of this. You've described viruses variously. You've called them brilliant, you call them crafty, you commented upon their mastery, industry, and even, you've even said rhapsody. So do you think that viruses have character?
I I know you've actually put me in a spot of bother, because I know a lot of people would be gunning for me for this as well. I think, how viruses modulate, as populations around them change, they tend to respond to those. And later they tend to control, because they infect and they decide to, kill a few of the hosts in which they infect, and some of them they just persist for a longer period and perhaps emerge or do other things. So it is a very variable world, and I think I'm very conscious of the fact that viruses now need to be called a life form. I know that they are inert and near dead when they're outside a host and they exhibit nothing. They're just a coat of protein with an RNA or a DNA inside them. But think about it. Once they spring into life, once they're into a cell, they have such majesty. And I think they are in complete command, right? I mean, these are verbs and not value attributions. I think what I'm trying to say here is that we must accord them the status of life form. That's the first thing. The fact that we classify them and give them names, we don't call them protein 1, protein 2, right? I mean, initially we did, but no longer. I mean, we have names and species name and everything. In fact, they have a more specialized taxonomy, a classification system than any other creature. Now, having said that, the challenge remains that should you be according them epithets of the kind that you mentioned? I think, yes, they do. Why not? Because it only adds value to our understanding of what do we anticipate when a creature or a life form were to exist in a certain condition in an ecosystem. So I think wily I would not support that point, because they're not directed, or they do not possess, directed intelligence. I think they tend to evolve looking at the conditions around them. They are programmed. So if you want to call a program intelligent, then yes, they might be intelligent. They can also be wily in that case. But I think it's what the response of their wiliness or their ingeniousness is because of what the conditions of the hosts are at the time and how they respond to populations. So I don't think people should be so, readers or listeners should be so, prickly about, you and I using the term wily or anything, or even rhapsody. For me personally, when I see a bacteria or a virus or even a nematode under a microscope, and the way that it behaved, it contorts, it moves, it does its own usual dance, I find that fascinating. So for me, I would use those epithets because I admire the beauty in them. I don't find them, the typical things that we call them, germ, critter, bug, all those things I think are derogatory, and I don't think need to be put in. So it's genuine love for me, for which I accord them these epithets or these qualifications. So I don't know. I think it is very context-based, and I'm not sure whether, when we are doing journal writing or serious communication writing, we should avoid wily. But when we are speaking the way we are now, I don't think it is so wrong. I think I was corrected once when I was talking about dinosaurs also, that, they are terrible dinosaurs and they're, extremely voracious eaters, but it is a term which is relative, right? And I think what makes them voracious at a certain time would be the environment or the fact that, if they're feasting on a carcass, they would be behaving that way. So I guess it's not something that we, I think by using epithets of the kind that we do, I think we are humanizing them and not anthropomizing them. I don't know what the term is, but something to that effect. I don't think there's anything wrong, because it brings in or accords them that value that they are alive. And I think I'm fine with it. Lots of people are not. I know my editors are not fine with it. They asked me to tone that down. So, yeah.
Right. And in that, I think lies something that we were talking about, readability and basically taking science to the people. If you don't humanize it, then are people going to get it? I mean, will your book be as unputdownable? If you completely left his turns out. I don't know. I mean, it's a question that we could ask. So if you were given at some point of time Kafka's powers of metamorphosis, which virus would you want to be? I mean, okay, we'll say, let's not say virus. Which microbe do you want to be? You know, the rhapsodic kind? What would you like to be?
That's a tough question. You know, somebody who loves viruses and bacteria and chlamydia and protozoa and nematodes and, you know, anything microscopic, I'm just hooked onto that. So it's a very difficult choice. It's like saying, me asking you, which is your favorite rock song? I mean, it's easy to say, which is your favorite rock band? That's simple. But once you come down to saying, hey, listen, you need to tell me the species, the song, that particular song, that becomes problematic, right? So I'm not, I don't know if I were, now again, I would, give myself the latitude and say, hey, listen, if I were in soil, I would like to be, the phage that kills Ralstonia, which is the most pathogenic agricultural crop bacteria. It's perhaps the highest ranked agricultural pathogen that is listed in the Bioterror Act of the US. So if I were to, actually, there was a scare in the early 90s and until quite recently that if somebody were to take a special new strain of Ralstonia, this thing that was actually found in the soil of Brazil, it initially could infect only about 20 species found in South America, but as crops started to go all over the world, it started to infect local crops as well. So now they believe anything between 400 and 500 species of native and exotic crops get affected by Ralstonia, and it's massive. It is so you would see obliteration of papaya, tomato, pineapple, which are in a mixed agroclimatic condition, but in a single farm, which is supposed to be protective. But in case of Ralstonia, it is indiscriminate. It would just go and decimate every crop that comes on its site. So I would like to be the phage that kills Ralstonia. But, since I've said bacteria, now I've said about virus, what would be my favorite bacteria? You're going to hate me for this, but, the organism that causes syphilis is called Treponema pallidum, is extremely beautiful. It looks like golden necklaces under a slide. It's beautiful. It looks so nice. It looks like as if you entered a jewelry shop. Not that I'm fond of gold or jewelry, but the fact that you're seeing it lit behind, in a slide when the light is coming from behind it, and the golden color of the bacteria when it comes out, it's quite heavenly, if I can say that. And it's a disease that is, the disease it causes is very painful and obnoxious. But I still quite admire the beauty of that bacteria.
Right. So I think this, in this answer is your entire book in a capsule. You see how much you love these microorganisms, and it comes out very beautifully in the book. I really enjoyed reading, and I must say, like I said earlier, my 9-year-old daughter read portions of it with me on the Kindle. And she's fascinated. This is the age where they start to become trivia buffs, and they love facts. So she really loves the book as well. And I think you should take a suggestion to do a kid's version at some point of time. More pictures and illustrations, and I think that will be lovely. So do consider that. Thank you so much, Pranay. I think we've had a lovely discussion, and I think there couldn't have been a more appropriate discussion or a book for the times we live in. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for this fascinating discussion on the world of the viruses and why we need to be empathetic and sensitive to them, and in the way we actually refer to them, and to also recognize that we know so little about them, and it's about time we get to know them just a little more. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of day 1 of the 10th edition of the Hindu Lit for Life. You will all agree that we've discussed some very pertinent ideas and subjects that truly need for us to deliberate upon them and also do what it takes to read and some more to become more sensitive to the world that we are in. See you tomorrow morning. We extend our heartfelt thanks to our sponsors.
Our associate sponsor is Rajasthan Tourism, realty partner Casa Grand, banking partner State Bank of India, insurance partner Life Insurance Corporation of India, knowledge partner Hindustan Institute of Technology and Science, bookstore partner Higginbotham's.
The entire village had disappeared. Bro, we're going to disappear as well. This place is haunted.
Don't be a chicken, man.
Listen, isn't this the same place where the girl had died?
Where are you guys from?
Delhi.
We are from Delhi as well.
To Binoy, Rajasthan seemed a bit like this.
When you buy a home, make sure it's always from the best builder. With 16 years of real estate expertise, over 100 superior projects, 17,000 happy customers, and 20 million square feet of living space. There's truly no better home than a Casa Grand home.
To Jane, Rajasthan seemed something like this.
पूजा जॉब छोड़ा फिर भी सो कूल।
ब्रो, नए चैलेंजेस नए मौके लाते हैं।
अच्छा,
सीरियसली राहुल, मेरा पूरा घर नाउ इट्स एन ऑनलाइन रिटेल स्टोर। देख।
वाओ, लेकिन पैसे?
कुछ साल पहले दिवाली बोनस को इन्वेस्ट किया था।
और अब तो है LIC का यूलिप प्लान निवेश प्लस। एक बार इन्वेस्ट करो, इंश्योरेंस से सुरक्षा का लाभ और मार्केट की बढ़त का फायदा दोनों पाओ।
वन सेक राहुल।
मैडम, यू आर डबल कूल।
Festivals bring a lot of happiness and precious moments that make us smile.
Avail exciting offers on personal loans, car loans and gold loans with zero processing fee and low interest rate. Apply now on sbiyono.sbi or log on to bank.sbi and welcome happiness this festive season.
SBI, हर त्योहार शुभ शुरुआत.
My journey of insurance and investments began at the same time when I invested in LIC SEEP. In this fast-moving world, SEEP can balance your funds with security and growth. SEEP will take care of the ups and downs of the market and will give you fruitful results so that you enjoy the ride. And when SEEP is with you, you can soar high!
LIC's unit-linked insurance plan SEEP offers savings and protection so that you can soar high in your life. LIC, हर पल आपके साथ.
Hindustan Institute of Technology and Science. Take your first step toward a future in excellence.